Chapter 1471. The Lord has been waiting for you, young master. Please don't delay the time. Even though they were only 2 hours away from Nia Qing's camp, Wei Yong was still worried based on Nia Qing's description. Nia Qing nodded and said warmly, "We'll set off now." After last night's ambush, he knew how dangerous the situation was. Who knew how many evil eyes were hiding in the dark? Nia Qing boarded the carriage with Wei Yong's help. Seeing that Nia Yang was still curled up in his sleeping position, Nia Qing was worried. Last night's ambush had frightened Yang badly. He had nightmares all night. Perhaps it was because the dreams were too terrifying, but his expression was extremely ferocious. Nia Qing tried to wake him up, but there was no response. If not for the fact that he was still breathing, Nia Qing would have suspected that Yang had been captured by the envoys. What kind of nightmare is this? Nia Qing worriedly held Nia Yang's hand. The back of his hand, which had bulging veins, was cold and sticky with sweat. Little did he know that Nia Yang was not having a nightmare. His pain level was several times higher than the most terrifying nightmare. Last night, Nia Yang was angry at the system for hiding things from him and carefully tested the system's bottom line. The system also sensed that Nia Yang's wings had hardened and was trying to escape its control. After a verbal exchange, it looked like it was going to collapse. Nia Yang had a Taoist treasure given to him by Venerable Liru. It was said to be able to suppress evil spirits. He showed this trump card and tried to negotiate with the system to gain the initiative and control. Unexpectedly, the system flew into a rage and tore off its false pretense. It was no longer gentle and obedient, but instead showed its ferocious side. The consequence of disobedience is being tortured to death. Do you really think a mere mortal can turn the tables in my hands? Although the Taoist treasure given to him by Venerable Liru did not cause any serious damage to the system, it did cause it some damage. This made the system extremely angry. Nia Yang was a mortal that grew up under its nose. He was just one of the many ants. Who gave him the confidence to try to shake the position of a god just because he had a trump card? The system did not mind Nia Yang having his own thoughts, but it could not tolerate an ant scheming against it. The system was experienced in dealing with such an unruly host. It guaranteed that it would be obedient. It needed force to make Nia Yang understand that the distance between them was a rift that mere mortals could not cross. Obey or die. Mortal, do you understand? The system wanted to kill Nia Yang for offending it, but it couldn't do that. First of all, it wasn't easy to find a suitable host. It had put in so much effort on Nia Yang. If it gave him up just like that, it would be a big loss. Secondly, Nia Yang's status was neither light nor heavy. He was one of the chess pieces that affected the fate of the entire plane. Once he was touched, the enemy in the dark would immediately notice. The system didn't want to suffer a double loss. Nia Yang was still useful. Since he couldn't replace it, he could only spend some effort to fix it. Nia Yang had never suffered like this before, but the stubbornness and toughness in his bones kept him going. Nia Yang refused to back down, and the system refused to let go, so the situation fell into a stalemate. However, Nia Yang was a mortal after all. He couldn't withstand such torture. He still had ambitions. He knew what it meant to be flexible and to be able to adapt to the circumstances. He could just temporarily give in and use the system to achieve his goals. He would find a way to get rid of this demon in the future. After a whole night of torture, Nia Yang opened his eyes tiredly when the troops were about to reach the Nia camp. If Nia Qing looked over, he would see that Nia Yang's eyes were filled with unwillingness and hatred. "Ah, Yang? You're awake?" Nia Qing put down the book and heaved a sigh of relief. He hurriedly helped Nia Yang up. At that moment, he noticed that Nia Yang's clothes were drenched in sweat, and there was a human-shaped wet mark where he had fallen asleep. Nia Yang himself looked exhausted. A few strands of his long hair were stuck to the side of his face. His black hair fell over his shoulders, making him look especially weak and pitiful. "Brother," Nia Yang tried to speak, but his voice was hoarse. His throat was burning. Ah Young, what nightmare did you have last night? No matter how I called you, you wouldn't wake up. Nia Qing's heart ached when he saw his cousin like this. Of course, Nia Yang couldn't tell the truth. He still felt like he had just survived a disaster. This made him feel ashamed and disgusted. He had actually succumbed to a demon's coercion. It was a great humiliation. Nia Yang said, "This little brother, cough cough, this little brother doesn't know either. I only remember, it was an extremely terrifying dream." Nia Qing saw the lingering fear on his cousin's face and couldn't bear to probe further. He changed the topic. Father has already sent troops to receive us. The camp is just ahead. Don't be afraid, Ah Yang. Nia Qing patted his back and comforted him like he was coaxing a child. Nia Yang closed his eyes tiredly, letting himself lean on Nia Qing's shoulder. If Nia Qing hadn't blocked his way, Nia Yang would have been happy to have such a considerate and meticulous elder brother take care of him. Because Nia Yang's condition wasn't good, Nia Qing didn't let him get off the carriage. After a short rest, he followed Wei Dan to see his father, Nia Liang. Nia Liang already knew that his son had been ambushed in the middle of the night and almost lost his life. For a moment, anger and worry coexisted in his heart. The two attacked his heart and Nia Liang almost fainted. Only when he saw Nia Qing did he feel better. Nia Qing was shocked at first glance when he saw his father. It had only been a while since they last met and his father had lost so much weight. Even though his father's eyes were as sharp as ever, the greenish-black in his eyes was like ink that wouldn't disperse. That face was so pale he didn't look like a living person and his lips were slightly green. Nia Qing immediately bowed deeply, his eyes slightly red. Nia Liang said coldly, "How old are you? Still crying like a 3-year-old? How can father be at ease when you're so unsteady?" Nia Qing lowered his head to hide his tears. Nia Liang said, "Father heard about your experience last night. You're steady. You've done well in this aspect." Even if he couldn't help, he wouldn't add to the mess. He remembered the saying, "A rich man should not sit under a roof," and wouldn't rashly place himself in a dangerous situation. After repelling the enemy, Nia Qing's handling of the situation was quite thorough. This made Nia Liang feel somewhat moved and gratified. It was a pity that Nia Qing was still too young. Once he wasn't here, how could Nia Qing stabilize the tottering Nia family? How could he control the surrounding demons and monsters? Thinking of this, Nia Liang felt a headache. The father and son talked for a while before Nia Liang sent his son away. A sweet, fishy taste surged up his throat. He caught it with a handkerchief and saw the familiar bright red. In a daze, Nia Liang heard the sound of drums outside the tent. He thought he had heard wrong. "Who's beating the drums outside?" The guard outside the tent said, "Reporting to my lord, the enemy has gathered their forces outside the camp to challenge us." When Nia Liang heard this, his pair of phoenix eyes widened in anger. Lu Shi is really going too far. He had bullied his son and almost caused him to send off his son. Then he brought his troops to challenge them. Chapter 1472. Love is not gay. Oh my god, the streamer is running on the road of self-deprecation and not looking back. Shinjia, you almost killed someone's son, and then you brought people to my door and beat me up. I don't even want to help the wall. I only respect the streamer. The salted fishes munched on their melons and moved their small stools over, waiting for the battle to begin. Little white bunny, there are a lot of trolls on the internet. All of them are saying that the streamer is shameless and sinister. The most vicious thing is a woman's heart. Blue drawer, forgive me for being blunt, but the host has been doing things her own way for so many years. When did she ever care about those contrarians? They could even find a reason to scold RMB. They really couldn't think of anything in this world that they couldn't scold. We are calm. Not everyone could accept Jiang Pengji's actions, especially those with fragile hearts. Not only did they have a fragile heart, but they also liked to find fault. Relying on the fact that the streamer couldn't do anything to them, they squatted on the internet to vilify Jiang Pengji. For example, a woman gave birth to a uterus to carry on the family line. It was a duty given by nature. She didn't find a man to marry and have children. Instead, she followed a man to fight for the world. Some reasons were purely Virgin Mary acting up. For example, Jiang Pengji was cruel and merciless. She killed a lot of people. She didn't have the slightest bit of kindness or civility. The most classic sentence of these haters was, "Oh my God, she fought for the world by killing people. Couldn't she evolve peacefully? Can't I use love to influence him? Why did they have to fight and kill? How sinful." Jiang Pengji didn't even bother to roll her eyes at this group of people who had to hold up their fingers like an orchid in a bar. In short, Jiang Pengji had two groups of loyal followers in the two dimensions. One group was the salted fish in the live broadcast room, fighting for a small bench for 10 years like a day. The other group was the haters who slandered her on the internet for 10 years like a day. This was probably true love. Jiang Pengji tried to kill Niao Liang's son on the way, but after she failed, she sent someone to challenge Niao Liang. She deliberately wanted to anger Niao Liang to death. Her intentions were too evil. They had never seen a woman as thick-skinned and vicious as Jiang Pengji. A woman's heart is the most poisonous. Some media outlets even accused her of abetting underage crime and increasing social violence. Anyway, Jiang Pengji couldn't see it, so they could criticize her however they wanted. Looking at the comments of the idle people in the streaming room, Jiang Pengji's reaction was still calm. She even said something extremely infuriating. "Host V, the media on your side are already so indignant. Niao Liang, the person involved, should be even more furious, right?" They had once again underestimated the host's shamelessness and psychological endurance. The salted fishes were silent for a long time. How could he reply? He could only use ellipses. As they chatted and laughed, the challenge continued. A certain kung fu will make full use of the language style of the boorish school. His challenge can infuriate someone to death. Quite a number of salted fish wished that they could change to something more elegant. Such cursing was very unpleasant to the ears. The scolding is too elegant. The enemy soldiers won't understand. Isn't this playing the lute to a cow? The more vulgar it is, the more people will understand it. Wasn't provoking the enemy to suppress their morale and make them angry? In this era where the literacy rate was less than 1%, people would think that you were soft and powerless even if you scolded elegantly. A salted fish asked a tricky question. Kojiao Qifan, Dongqing and Zhongzhou are two different countries. The language barrier must be huge, right? Do you understand? Jiang Pengji said, "Don't you know that you can learn scolding words even from a different race?" Even if they didn't understand, they knew that the other party was scolding them. This was the charm of scolding. As they spoke, the enemy finally responded. "My men." Jiang Pengji drew out the god-slaying sword and carried it on her shoulder. She raised her chin slightly and said arrogantly, "It's time to start." Sun Wen, who was supervising the battle, was speechless. This time, they sent out troops to anger Niao Liang. Time was tight, many weapons could not be in place, and only a part of the army could be brought over. If they really fought, Jiang Pengji's side did not have a big advantage. In order to guard the pass and prevent Niao Liang from sending people to attack Zhangjiang Pass, she had to close the gate tightly. Therefore, the follow-up reinforcements were definitely not as good as the enemy's. Niao Liang rushed into battle, and his preparation was not as good as Jiang Pengji's. If the battle started, he would definitely suffer a small loss. If the two armies fought for a long time, Niao Liang's reinforcements would catch up, and Jiang Pengji would fall into a passive and disadvantageous position. Based on various considerations, Jiang Pengji sent out troops this time to slip away. It was enough to let Niao Liang's troops follow behind them and eat a mouthful of yellow sand. Wasn't it cheap? Extremely cheap. However, Jiang Pengji liked it that way. The old chief who was watching silently in the streaming room chuckled. The 7th Army Corps, the vanguard of the frontline battle, was led astray by Jiang Pengji. If the upper beam was not straight, the lower beam would be crooked. Jiang Pengji was dressed in red and silver armor. The white horse beneath her rushed out of the army like lightning and blended into the vast sea of people, harvesting heads to her heart's content. White, we haven't had such fun in a long time. Ever since little White, the bastard, abducted White, other than his first child, White had given birth to 3 more times. No matter how hard Jiang Pengji tried, she could not force pregnant women to go to the battlefield. She could only wait for White's boring pregnancy to pass. They had not fought together for a long time. If little White was not obedient, Jiang Pengji really wanted to stab the horse in the root of its sin. White understood human nature very well, and its already restless and active emotions rose. Its body was relatively large. Although it was not as tall and strong as the heavy horses of the heavy cavalry battalion, it was still a strong and sturdy little girl. Its entire body was covered in armor. White's combat style became wilder and wilder. Its charge was like the weight of Mount Tai. The horse opposite it let out a shrill scream and had to take a few steps back to stabilize itself. By the time it stabilized itself, the owner on the horse's back had already been beheaded by Jiang Pengji. After killing for a while, Jiang Pengji patted White's neck. Go back. Dabai was very reluctant. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, if we accidentally go overboard, those little princesses will act up. She was the Lord. No matter how good she was at fighting, she could not ignore the petty hearts of the civil and military officials. Later, if they don't catch up to us, I plan to give Niaoliang a big gift. Jiang Pengji carried the god-slaying saber for a while until the white horse under her became a scarlet horse. She then retreated reluctantly. Sun Wen silently turned his head to look at his lord. He had not gotten used to having a lord who could fight so well. He chose to ignore the fact that his lord had gone to the battlefield again and asked, what big gift? Jiang Pengji said, a set of gorgeous women's clothes. Sun Wen was speechless. She smiled and said, if it's not a girl who has to hold up her fingers like an orchid in a club, then it's a weak woman in men's clothes. Otherwise, why can't the enemy even catch up? Zidao, do you think Niaoliang will be so angry that he will vomit blood if I give this along with the clothes? Sun Wen was speechless. His lord was the one who was born with the wrong gender. She could even tell dirty jokes in such a fresh and refined way. Even though Sun Wen's grandson was about to discuss marriage, he still could not accept his lord's dirty jokes. Chapter 1473. No, perhaps Sun Wen should be more worried about whether his grandson would be led astray by the lord's side. Gifting women's clothing. This behavior will definitely be criticized in the future. As a conservative old man, Sun Wen did not approve of his lord using such methods to attack the enemy. It was not because of anything else, but it was not good to be recorded in the future history books. Jiang Pengji said with a smile, so what? A person who conforms to the rules, no matter how well he does, is not as attractive as a person who has a mixed reputation. People should always have some mysterious or interesting things that people will talk about. Only then will the future generations remember them. Sun Wen held back and finally spat out 2 words that were somewhat overstepping his boundaries. Nonsense. Sun Wen studied orthodox knowledge and belonged to the conservative faction. However, his lord was a trendy person with active thoughts. For example, in this matter, he felt that a gentleman should cherish his reputation. It did not matter what methods were used to attack the enemy. What was important was his reputation. However, Jiang Pengji did not care about her reputation. She actually came up with such a childish method to provoke him by gifting women's clothing. If Niaoliang was angered by her and something happened to him, would the history books write about her in such a way? Contrarians love to ignore merits and seize on shortcomings and blemishes to make a big fuss. Compared to the achievements of the predecessors, the future generations preferred to use a magnifying glass to find the shortcomings of the predecessors. To put it nicely, it was to use the past as a mirror, history as a mirror to know the vicissitudes of life, and people as a mirror to understand gains and losses. Jiang Pengji's thoughts were different. She said, "Sigh, I know what Zidao is worried about, but no one is perfect. For someone like me who is unprecedented, I'm afraid that if I'm too wise and powerful, unparalleled, virtuous, and awe-inspiring, the later generations will feel too much pressure. If I leave some harmless flaws and blemishes, the official and unofficial history books can use them to entertain the future generations." The salted fishes nodded their heads like pounding garlic and eagerly agreed. The streamer was right. They were cheering for their streamer. Sun Wen was speechless. To be narcissistic to such an extent, it was indeed unprecedented in both the past and the future. It was unprecedented in both the past and the present. He suddenly did not want to think about how his lord would be recorded in the history books. They would most likely misinterpret her as a wicked woman with 3 heads and 6 arms, right? After all, the lord was so good at fighting and could even tell dirty jokes. She could dominate the battlefield by herself with a knife and a horse. When these words were added together, the first impression that would appear in the minds of ordinary people was a big and burly man with a thunderous voice, broad shoulders and a narrow waist. Thinking of this, Sun Wen tilted his head and glanced at his lord's profile. Perhaps it was because her style was too unlike that of a traditional woman. The world would be awed by her aura at first glance and then ignore her beauty. In all fairness, his lord's appearance was quite good at fighting. When she was dressed as a man, she looked suave and unparalleled. When she was dressed as a woman, she had a different taste as well. If she could leave behind a few portraits, she might be able to salvage the image of a ferocious and evil woman in the eyes of future generations. Thus, he sincerely suggested, "When my lord returns, can you leave a few more portraits behind?" Jiang Pengji looked at him dumbfoundedly. She did not understand how the topic had changed from the disagreement between the ruler and the minister to painting. While the two of them were conversing, the battlefield was still filled with battle cries. Qin Gong and the other generals carefully mobilized the entire army, ensuring that the soldiers would not be held back by the enemy because of a momentary victory. It was hard to say about Jiang Pengji's other strengths, but she was unusually decisive on the battlefield. The enemy could not trick her with small gains. She said that she wanted to take advantage of the situation and then leave, so she would not allow the soldiers under her command to be greedy and rash. Qin Gong and the others were well aware of this. They were even more careful when leading the troops into battle, not daring to anger her. Report, the reinforcements of the Nya army camp are about to arrive. Upon hearing this, Jiang Pengji and Sun Wen turned their attention to the battlefield. According to the current situation, their army still had the upper hand. If they continued to fight, they would definitely be able to bite off a piece of the enemy's flesh. However, Sun Wen asked, "My lord, do you want to withdraw your troops?" Jiang Pengji said casually, "Why not? Are we waiting for Niel Yang's reinforcements to come and turn the situation around?" Sun Wen understood in his heart. At the same time, he lamented his lord's decisive style. Not to mention the feudal lords, even the ordinary soldiers on the battlefield would not easily make up their minds to withdraw when they saw that the situation was favorable for their side. It was admirable that his lord could resist the temptation of benefits that was so close at hand. After the discussion, Sun Wen sent people to sound the gongs to withdraw the troops. At the same time, he issued several mandatory military orders. The original vanguard troops became the rear. Step by step, they covered the retreat of the main army and retreated from the front line in an orderly manner. The quality of the troops under Jiang Pengji's command was already very high, but there were still some soldiers who were greedy for merits and dilly-dallied and refused to retreat. They were trampled into meat paste by the swarming enemy. Fortunately, there were not many people like this. The elite vanguard troops fought and retreated in an orderly manner. Not long after, they got rid of Niel Yang's vanguard troops and ran away. When Niel Yang's reinforcements arrived at the front line, they could only watch the enemy retreat, stirring up billowing yellow sand. Seeing this, General Nie's already livid face darkened a few shades. Are these bandits born in the year of rabbits? They ran away so quickly. "General, should we give chase?" Si Jiang was also extremely angry. He had been suppressed and beaten by the enemy just now and was extremely sullen. When the reinforcements arrived, they finally had a chance to avenge their humiliation. Who would have thought that the enemy would retreat at this critical juncture? Being asked this question by Si Jiang, the Nia general felt extremely depressed. If they did not give chase, the enemy would suddenly come knocking on their door and violently beat up their own people before swaggering off. They would lose face. If they gave chase, they would be afraid that this was the enemy's evil plot. If they gave chase, they would step into a trap. When the enemy retreated, there was order in the chaos. If they gave chase, it would be easy to mess up the army formation. If the enemy took advantage of the chaos in their army formation to turn around and attack, wouldn't it be a great loss? To give chase or not to give chase, it was not a good choice. The Nia general secretly gritted his teeth. In the end, he still decided to give chase, but he did not dare to go all out. Jiang Pengji's side easily pulled away. When Jiang Pengji's army retreated to Zhangjiang Pass and the gate was closed again, the Nia army troops arrived late and suffered a wave of arrows on the city wall. The arrows in front were like a tide. The Nia army was not there to break through the pass. In order to reduce casualties, they could only retreat out of the shooting range. The Nia general was speechless. "I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it." "You are very arrogant, does your father know?" A certain deputy general muttered, "Isn't she playing with people?" He had accidentally discovered the truth. Wasn't Jiang Pengji playing with people? Looking at the angry gaze of the Nia army outside the pass, Jiang Pengji rubbed her chin and snapped her fingers. She asked the deputy general guarding the pass on the city wall to come closer and whisper a few words into his ear. Si Jiang accepted the order with a rippling face. After a while, a dozen strong men, who were 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide, stepped on the city wall. Simple loudspeakers made of copper plates were placed in front of them. The strong men gathered their qi in their dantian and shouted loudly. Their voices were like thunder. Chapter 1474. What kind of courteous gift is this? General Nia Jun was so angry that he almost vomited blood. His entire face looked like he had been constipated for many years. He was unwilling to give the order to retreat, but he was thinking about how to explain himself. Because the two armies had only fought for a short period of time, the actual casualties on both sides were not high, so this battle could not be considered a defeat. There was one thing that could not be ignored. Jiang Pengji's continuous and coquettish actions were equivalent to a loud slap on Nia Jun's face. They could argue that Jiang Pengji was too shameless, but it couldn't change the fact that they were humiliated. The Nia army had obviously chased Jiang Pengji's army into Zhangjiang Pass, but when they returned, they were like a group of defeated roosters. The frontline military report immediately reached Nia Liang's ears. Before the Nia army's general arrived, he already knew the whole story. Nia Liang's face turned pale after hearing this, but his expression did not change. Only the two people close to him could see that his fingers were trembling slightly because of his anger. Wei Dan and Fan Chen looked at each other. They could see the deep worry and criticism of Jiang Pengji in each other's eyes. Although the other civil and military officials in the tent did not see it, they knew that the atmosphere in the tent was not right. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Nia Liang took a deep breath and suppressed the roiling rage in his heart. He would not fly into a rage because of Jiang Pengji's naughtiness, but he did feel uncomfortable. If it wasn't for his excellent endurance, he would have been angered to the point of death. After a while, Nia Liang asked, "How's the weather and wind direction tomorrow?" A man stepped out of the tent and cupped his hands. Judging from the weather and wind direction, tomorrow should be a sunny day with a southeast wind. There was little rain in the north, and it was currently summer. It was not difficult to speculate the recent changes in the weather with some knowledge of geomancy and geography. Now that the weather is dry, withered trees are easily flammable. The southeast wind is just right. Niao lowered his eyes and said, "Order people to prepare dry wood, firewood, and black oil. Tomorrow, at the hour of the third day, send troops to attack Zhangjiang Pass. Lu Shi toyed with us today. Tomorrow, we will burn him to death." Fan Shen said in surprise, "All the trees in the forest near Zhangjiang Pass have been chopped down by Lu Shi's men until only wooden stumps are left. Burning them probably won't work." Niao said, "Smoke and fire scorching, I'll return the favor." Everyone understood that this wasn't a proper attack. It was just a test of the enemy's strength, and at the same time, a way to get back at them for what had happened today. However, they never expected Jiang Pengji to be mischievous. How could being mischievous be enough? Report, there are hundreds of prisoners of war outside the camp. Niao raised his eyebrows and felt that things were not simple. Since he was a captive, he shouldn't have deserted during the battle. He was most likely captured by the enemy before the battle. The enemy captured captives and then released them. What did this mean? Captive? What is Lu Shi up to this time? Fan Shen was subconsciously frightened. From Jiang Pengji to Sun Wen, none of her subordinates were normal. The soldier stammered, "Those captives were all dressed in women's clothing. I can't describe them, huh?" Everyone was confused. When they went out to take a look, they were immediately embarrassed and angry. Their decades of self-restraint were all gone. The captives were all elites of the Nia clan who had been abducted from the front lines. Their battle robes embroidered with the emblem of the Nia clan had been stripped off and replaced with gaudy and extremely ill-fitting female clothes. Like prey, they were tied up in a row with a rope, and their feet were also shackled. According to the scouts' report, they were chased here by Jiang Pengji's cavalry with a shepherd's whip. The soldiers also found a brocade box hanging around the neck of one of them. The words on it were written in flamboyant calligraphy and looked imposing. "Gift to Guangshan? For the Lord, Niao." One of them took down the brocade box and secretly weighed its weight. "Please allow me to examine it, lest there be filth hidden in it and hurt the Lord." A brave general stepped forward and opened the brocade box. He was almost blinded by the jewelry inside. He took a closer look and saw a set of gorgeous jewelry. Underneath it was a set of complicated and gorgeous women's clothing, a sachet, and all kinds of accessories. Everyone was silent. They were speechless, but the anger in their hearts was rising. A set of women's clothing and jewelry was given to the Lord of Guangshan? Immediately, a noble man fainted from anger. The crowd pressed on his philtrum for a long time before he woke up. "She's going too far. She's going too far." The noble man was so angry that his fingers were trembling. He had an angry and aggrieved expression. A vicious woman with such filthy, vicious, vulgar thoughts. How is there even an ounce of gentlemanly demeanor in her every move? First, she sent people to attack Niao only son. The next day, she brought people to attack him. She did not fight properly and left after humiliating him. Now, she dressed the captives in women's clothing. She made them put on makeup. They wore eye-catching red buttocks, cheeks, and blushes. She also gave Niao a set of women's clothing. Each of these actions was enough to make one Buddha come into being and 2 Buddhas ascend to heaven. At this moment, someone in the tent said angrily, "Why don't we give her a set of the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women and let her know what a woman's duty is? Come on, let's hurt each other." Although Wei Yong did not look at the person, he felt some contempt in his heart. He flatly refused. "No, we're at a disadvantage." What was the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women? It was a malignant tumor that had plagued Zhongzhou for many years. It was an evil thing that the demon Empress created to harm Zhongzhou. In the first few years, everyone was against it. However, there were still some who secretly regarded it as a standard. No one knew what they were after. Jiang Pengji's mischief was indeed disgusting, but it was a normal method of confrontation. If one side sent the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women to attack the other party's gender in order to disgust others, it was tantamount to offending all the women in the world. In essence, they were at a disadvantage and could easily bring shame to their lord, Niao. When the person saw Wei Yong speak, he was a little angry, but he did not dare to refute. Someone else was not pleased. What did he mean by, at a disadvantage? Could it be that Lu Shi, the traitor, humiliated the lord with a set of women's clothing is at a disadvantage? Wei Yong said, "You can send a set of men's clothing over." Everyone was speechless. They all knew that Jiang Pengji initially presented herself as a man. Later, when she became famous at the Huangshui meeting, she changed to a woman. For her, there was actually no difference between men's clothing and women's clothing. If she gave him a set of men's clothing, she might even say thank you. In the summer, she would have an extra set of clothes to change into. She could be shameless enough to say thank you. Could Niao respond by thanking her generously for giving him a change of clothes? Wasn't that nonsense? Probably because he had been provoked previously, Niao was quite calm in the face of the women's clothing and the women's hair. He said calmly, "The goddess has the intention, but I have no intention." Wei Yong was silent for a moment. He instantly understood Niao response. Chapter 1475. In a few words, Niao turned away the humiliation of gifting women's clothes, and made a fool out of Jiang Pengji. According to Niao words, Jiang Pengji gifting him a set of Lu Shi's women's clothes was not a humiliation, but Jiang Pengji shamelessly courting Niao. However, he rejected her with the reason that the goddess has the heart, but the king has no desire. At the same time, he pointed out that he had a wife and son, and that Jiang Pengji's age was not suitable for him. He also said that her age was more suitable for his son, cleverly resolving the crisis. Lu Shi is affectionate and righteous. My lord burned the women's clothes as a sacrifice to the flag. If you don't inform her, outsiders will inevitably say that you are heartless. Niao looked at Wei Dan and could not help but laugh. In my opinion, Zi Shun is more romantic. He understands women's thoughts and is unwilling to hurt a beauty's heart. Wei Dan echoed, "My lord, please excuse me." Niao asked someone to prepare a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. He personally wrote a reply to Jiang Pengji. Under the escort of hundreds of men and horses, the messenger rode a fast horse all the way to Zhangjiang Pass, hoping to deliver the letter before nightfall. The soldiers standing guard on the city wall immediately discovered the small group of enemies. Their nerves tightened and they tightened their grip on the red tasseled spears in their hands. The guard shouted to the enemy below the city wall, "Who are you?" The atmosphere on and below the city wall was tense, and it seemed like a fight was about to break out. "We are under the orders of our lord to deliver a letter to your lord." The messenger hurriedly expressed his intentions, tied the letter to the arrowhead, and drew his heavy bow, aiming at the top of the city wall. With a soft buzz, the arrow left the bowstring and pierced into the gap between the huge rocks on the city wall. "The letter has been delivered. Farewell." The messenger put away his long bow and cupped his hands in the direction of the city wall. He grabbed the reins and turned the horse around. When the group of people disappeared on horseback, the soldiers guarding the city wall laboriously took the letter down from the city wall and hurriedly delivered it to the commander's tent. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "Niao wrote a reply to me? Let me see. Is he writing a letter to scold me in exasperation?" She was very clear about what she had done. No matter how well-mannered she was, she would still be furious. Writing a letter to scold her back was normal. However, Wei Ci and the rest felt that it was not the case. As the most powerful duke in Zhongzhou, Niao was not that narrow-minded. Just because Jiang Pengji was mischievous, he wrote a letter to scold her. It was too ungentlemanly and uncultured. In the live stream, Salted Fish craned his neck to read the contents of the letter. Tudu Feichio, looks like our streamer knows her place. Fortunately, this was ancient times when transportation and communication were not developed. If it were modern times, people would definitely crawl along the network cable to beat you up. Those with even a little bit of self-restraint would also block your door and beat you up. Dudu, I have a question. With the streamer's combat ability, asking her to fight one-on-one is like asking for death, okay? Why did she dare to be so naughty? Wasn't it because she could fight? I also felt sorry for Niel Yang. Encountering such an opponent, he would feel aggrieved whether he fought or not. The salted fish watched the entire process of Jiang Pengji teasing Niel Yang. Even the woman's top and hair were given by the salted fish. Jiang Pengji had originally planned to give her a plain set of female clothes, but the salted fishes felt that it was inappropriate and insisted on pink and tender ones. Halfway through, a salted fish strongly suggested that she might as well give her a set of morning clothes for morning. In her opinion, this suggestion was much worse than her own. Silently glancing at the bullet screen, she felt that these salted fishes were really evil. They said that they felt sorry for Niel Yang, but in their actions, they could not wait for Jiang Pengji to trample Niel Yang to death. Let me see, what did he write? Jiang Pengji muttered as she took out the letter from the box. With a shake of her wrist, she shook the neatly folded letter open. The handwriting is quite nice, and it has the aura of a master. Niel Yang is already so sick, but his wrist still wields the brush so vigorously. Jiang Pengji commented with praise and sarcasm, then continued to read the contents. The more she read, the more serious her expression became, and a hint of murderous intent appeared between her brows. Qiguan rang and the others were waiting for news. When they saw their lord's expression, they knew that the letter was not as simple as it seemed. What's written in the letter? Jiang Pengji was so angry that she slammed the letter on the table. The bronze table made a loud noise, and the four corners of the table suspiciously sank by 2 inches. What's written? I've never seen such a narcissistic person. She could not tolerate that he was even more narcissistic than her. Qiguan Rang stepped forward and said, "May I have a look?" Jiang Pengji hummed, "Take it and read it. Just don't be angry and anything bad will happen to you." Qiguan Rang's face turned ashen after reading it. He handed the letter to Wei Ci, who was closest to him. Wei Ci took it suspiciously, and his expression turned ugly as well. He said, "This is a peace poem." Wei Ci had lived in Zhongzhou for many years in his previous life, so he was naturally familiar with the customs there. Around the flower festival, most of the gentry ladies would get busy and participate in various banquets and poetry meetings. At the same time, men of suitable age would also be invited. To put it bluntly, it was a large-scale matchmaking event. If a woman was interested in a man, she would write a gloomy courtship poem on a handkerchief or a sachet to show off her talent. After the man received it, if he was interested in the woman, he would accept the gift. If he was not interested, he would write a peace poem to reject the gift. Of course, this was a custom from more than 20 years ago. It was once considered a major festival in Zhongzhou. Ever since the demon Empress wrote the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women to restrain the women of the world and impart virtue to them, this tradition was also treated as trash and abandoned. Not to mention matchmaking, exchanging keepsakes in private, even if they met once, it was immoral. Niel Yang wrote this as a reply to convey a message: "Don't think too highly of yourself, I'm not interested in you." Qiguan Rang snorted coldly. This Niel Yang can't be underestimated. It was obviously a great humiliation, but not only did he endure it, but he also retaliated beautifully, making Jiang Pengji suffer in silence. He was impressive. Wei Ci's expression was cold, and no one knew what he was thinking. However, his heart was definitely not as calm as he looked. Didn't he see that the letter was about to be crushed into a ball? They were all waiting for Jiang Pengji's decision. Would she write a reply or something else? Jiang Pengji appeared to be free and easy. She said, "What reply?" The 2 feudal lords frequently communicate with each other. What will the future generations say? Niel Yang has already decided on the matter of the women's clothing. If I write again, won't it prove his words? Just ignore him and fight on the battlefield. She really didn't take this matter to heart. At most, she felt that Niel Yang was quite narcissistic. Everyone felt like a fishbone was stuck in their throats. They couldn't wait to run to Nieliang and get back at him. Don't take this matter to heart. It's just a small trick. Let's meet him on the battlefield. It's getting late. Let's disperse. Everyone dispersed. Those who had work to do and those who had meals ate. Only Wei Ci sneaked back. Jiang Pengji seemed to have expected it. She rested her chin on her hand and looked at him with a smile. Are you jealous, Zixiao? Wei Ci sighed. Why would I be jealous because of this? He was just worried that his lord was really angry and was putting up a strong front in order not to worry others. Looking at it now, she really didn't take Miao Yang's counterattack to heart. Why did he feel an inexplicable heartache? Chapter 1476. That's a pity. I wanted to see your jealous expression. Jiang Pengji smiled. You're always so calm. Girls sometimes feel insecure. Sometimes, I doubt whether Zixiao's feelings for me are the loyalty of a subject to the emperor or the love of a man for a woman. Zixiao doesn't intend to give me a response to this. Let me be at ease. Wei Ci closed and opened his eyes again. His gaze was still clear and bright. He knew the woman in front of him too well. She would never worry about the gains and losses of a relationship. He understood this in his previous life. If she really fell in love like an ordinary woman, she would not be the Her Majesty that Wei Ci knew. Jiang Pengji felt a little awkward under his gaze. She coughed lightly. All right, I won't flirt with you anymore. I just wanted to see your jealous reaction. You can't even satisfy me with this. Wei Ci admitted, of course I feel jealous. It's human nature. Why does my lord think that I don't have the emotions that a normal man should have? Jiang Pengji said, probably because of the posture. Wei Ci was speechless. The salted fish who were watching the conversation between the two of them instantly received tens of thousands of points of critical damage. Driving in front of 5 million salted fish, don't the two of you have a conscience? Gui kai guo fengxiao, oh, is it only me who's curious about their posture when they're in harmony? Tudu feiqiao, to the previous comment, 404 warning. We're currently cleaning up the internet. We're cracking down on pornography and illegal publications. Take it easy. The salted fish twitched their mouths. It was fine for the streaming room to serialize pornography and illegal publications, but the crackdown on pornography and illegal publications could not reach here. Moreover, yes Hen Fengquang, no, the person driving is the streamer. Shouldn't 404 warning be given to her? They were just salted fish who were watching and chatting. Not only did they have to be fed dog food by the streamer, but they were also accidentally injured by 404. It was too pitiful. Jiang Pengji said, Zixiao, did you come back to make me unhappy? Wei Ci admitted honestly, I'm just worried that Nieliang's wording will hurt my lord. Jiang Pengji said, there's nothing to worry about. For you and Wenjing, it's a disgrace to your reputation, but it's a trivial matter to me. Nieliang mustered all his strength to counterattack, but he hit cotton. I felt sorry for him. Zixiao, let me tell you something. In my previous life, I was devastatingly beautiful. My looks were many times better than Lu Shi's face. My figure was also very good. There are so many people who like me. I remember there was a guy with a mental problem. He lived in the same neighborhood as me. He was married and had a child. After the first time we met, he spent all day fantasizing that I liked him and loved him to death. She rarely took the initiative to mention her past life, so Wei Ci listened attentively. Knowing that she was entangled by such a strange person, Wei Ci couldn't help but worry. And then? Did he offend you? How can that be? If I'm harmed by him, I might as well kneel in front of the old leader and die. It's too embarrassing. Jiang Pengji waved her hand and said, that person crazily imagined that I liked him. He even posted my portrait on a public platform and passionately confessed to me. He imagined that I also loved him to death. It's worth mentioning that his wife was even weirder. She cried and threw a tantrum several times, telling me not to seduce her husband. Wei Ci frowned when he heard that. Could it be that this couple has lost their minds? Jiang Pengji shrugged and said, they weren't crazy, but there was something wrong with their brains. There was a limit to my tolerance. I beat them up and hung them at a height of 160 stories for 2 days. In order to avoid trouble from public opinion, I smeared them with the military's newly developed invisibility liquid and silencing equipment. Then I found a lawyer to sue them and sent them to a mental hospital for a few days. Jiang Pengji wasn't an orthodox person from a military school. She believed in using violence to curb violence. At that time, she was a genetic warrior with a secret identity. She had to carry out extremely dangerous missions at any time, so her identity couldn't be exposed, let alone her portrait on a public platform. Because of that, she was reprimanded by her superior. Jiang Pengji was so angry that she vented her anger on the couple. Because she did it secretly, she was fine. Otherwise, she would have been criticized. She said, I've even seen such a weirdo. Niel Yang's is just a piece of cake. Wei Ci was speechless. Jiang Pengji was about to proudly talk about other, glorious deeds, when the old chief sent her a private message. You Abba, hang them at a height of 160 stories? Jiang Pengji replied, I brought oxygen patches and thermal pads for them. They won't die from the cold or suffocation at high altitudes. You Abba, although it violated military law, I wasn't a part of the military at that time. My hands and feet were clean. Others couldn't catch me. The old chief had mixed feelings. She was like a class teacher, watching the students who graduated from her class confess the pranks they did when they were students. Such a mischievous student was definitely not taught by her. The old chief was doubting his life. Wei Ci also had mixed feelings. He suddenly realized that the place his lord lived in her previous life was a world he couldn't imagine. Only the environment there could make her so open-minded. Wei Ci and the others were filled with righteous indignation at Niel Yang's counterattack. Who asked Niel Yang to use the lord's reputation as a ruse, but the person involved didn't care at all. He laughed bitterly to himself. The lord wouldn't worry about personal gains and losses because of feelings, but he would. Especially when he realized how big of a gap there was between their worldviews, he became more and more flustered. Instead of that, it would be better to stay at a distance like in her previous life. Perhaps it would be better. The human heart was greedy. After tasting a little sweetness, they would hope for more and be closer. Sometimes Wei Ci would despise himself for acting like this. He was bashful and it was really not pleasant. Just as Wei Ci was lost in his thoughts, a shadow came over his head. It turned out that Jiang Pengji had come to him. I wanted to see your jealous look earlier. Now that I've seen it, my heart aches. Am I not torturing myself? Jiang Pengji was originally a person who didn't understand things. Or rather, she was abnormally slow when it came to relationships. She rarely cared about others. She had been in contact with salted fish for so many years and had unintentionally changed a lot. Zixiao, were you feeling uneasy just now? Can you tell me why? Wei Ci naturally didn't want to say it. Those thoughts were really hard to talk about. However, he never knew how to reject what she wanted to do, and what she wanted to obtain. I'm delusional. Is it possible for me to monopolize the person in front of me in this life? He didn't dare to think that way in his previous life. In his previous life, he even went against his will to persuade her to secretly select outstanding men to serve in the palace. It was impossible for the emperor to only have one person by his bedside. This was very dangerous and not good for politics. If the emperor doted on one person, the possibility of his maternal relatives being loved would greatly increase. Historically, it wasn't a good thing for relatives to interfere in politics. Chapter 1477. What, you don't know how to speak? Jiang Pengji waved her hand in front of Wei Ci's face. but he still had a cute, lifeless look. Wei Ci was too calm and composed. It was as if he could maintain a calm and dignified attitude at all times. It was rare to see him lose his composure like this. Jiang Pengji was not in a hurry to make him come back to his senses. Instead, she smiled and admired him. Wei Ci blushed under her scorching gaze. "Am my lord?" Wei Ci felt as if his heart was about to jump out of his throat. His ears were filled with the sound of his heartbeat. It was so loud that he could not help but wonder if Jiang Pengji could hear it. As he thought about it, his face, which was already 90% cooked, immediately became very cooked. Jiang Pengji's thumb twitched as she looked at him. Unfortunately, this was a military camp. She did not mind, but she had to take care of Wei Ci. A melon that was forcefully taken would not be sweet. That person, his surname is Wei, given name Ci, courtesy name Zixiao. This sentence was almost said with his earlobe in her mouth. Her hot breath blew on his sensitive ear, making his mouth and tongue feel hot. Jiang Pengji did not close the streaming room. Their interaction was watched by Salted Fish. Glistening Star Master, host, are you trying to take revenge on us? Previously, we held back for so many years and didn't touch Beauty Ci. Now, we have to eat their dog food every few days. I'm full, I'm full, I'm full, I'm full, I'm full of dog food. The live broadcast room is filled with the smell of dog abuse. Yaoing Yun, sob sob sob, asterisk 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 caret asterisk asterisk asterisk, streamer, you've changed. In the past, you only flirted with Salted Fish, but now you only flirted with Beauty Ci. Nia Biling, host, tell me, are all of us 5 million years old Salted Fish not as attractive as Beauty Ci? Are we Salted Fish not salty enough, or is your standards of beauty too high? Look here, there are still 5 million salted fish waiting for you. Tudu Feichio, have some self-awareness. A salted fish is not as important as a beauty. The salted fishes silently watched the two display their affection and felt stifled. This live stream was too unfriendly to single salted fishes. They thought that the host would stay single with them until the end of time, but they didn't expect that she would secretly betray the organization. Jiang Pengji still had some integrity. She did not do anything shameful in front of 5 million salted fish. She stopped flirting after a while. Wei Ci spent a lot of energy to suppress the waves of excitement in his heart and regain his composure. My lord. Cough, why did my lord suddenly say this? Wei Ci had a reserved temperament. Even though he had seen His Majesty in his previous life, he was still a little embarrassed when faced with his lord's straightforwardness and boldness. Jiang Pengji said, a salted fish once told me that even if a relationship is established, the other half will panic if there is no promise. Wei Ci looked puzzled. Salted fish? Jiang Pengji said, salted fish is fish that is marinated in salt and dried in the sun. The salter it is, the more it goes with rice. There was a time when she was browsing through the bullet screen records out of boredom and happened to see such a sentence. At first, she was careless and thought that it was unnecessary. However, the situation just now reminded her that even the smartest person would be hesitant and uncertain when it came to feelings. She could afford to make a promise. Wei Ci didn't ask why the dried salted fish could speak, because when his lord spoke, he really couldn't understand. Jiang Pengji glanced at the bullet screen and happened to see a comment. Cafeteria Daffin Auntie, what the streamer means is that Zixiao is the saltiest among all the salted fish, so you picked him to eat? Wu Hanyu, amazing, my boss, your reading comprehension must be full marks. Ling Dian Xianmeng, the case is solved. We can't compete with Beauty Ci because we aren't as salty as him. Jiang Pengji smiled awkwardly but politely. The salted fish were still chatting and laughing. Jiang Pengji secretly rolled her eyes. I'm afraid Niao Yang won't let this go easily. After Wei Ci calmed down a little, he entered work mode. The charming and ambiguous atmosphere disappeared completely, making people sigh at his ability unwillingly. After a man and a woman confided their feelings to each other, if they didn't have some inappropriate content, wouldn't it be a waste of the atmosphere that was created with great difficulty? The two of them, on the other hand, switched between love and work mode at will. Jiang Pengji said, he definitely won't let this go easily, but this is also what I want. Isn't it better that Nieliang is willing to take the initiative to send troops? It saves me the risk of going out of seclusion and increasing the risk. If they attack forcefully, it's mostly a probing attack. They won't use all their strength right from the start. There were more than 200,000 troops on Nieliang's side. This was not a false number, it was a real 200,000 troops. From this, it could be seen how much pressure Jiang Pengji was under to guard the pass. However, she was sure that the outcome of this battle would be decided in at most half a year. Who asked Nieliang to have a short life? If the lord of a force died of illness in front of the battle, even if the heir stepped forward to stabilize the situation, the morale of the army and their combat power would be greatly reduced. Apart from that, the Nia camp still had Nieyang, who carried the system fragment and had ill intentions towards Nieliang and Niaqing. In Jiang Pengji's opinion, the scales of victory and defeat were already tilted towards her. Wei Ci reminded her, there are still a few batches of our army supplies that haven't arrived yet. Jiang Pengji said, I know, I can't show my fear. Nieliang was a shrewd person. If Jiang Pengji showed any signs of lacking confidence, he could not guarantee that he would use all his troops to attack forcefully. After thinking about it, Jiang Pengji asked someone to call Qiguan Rang over to discuss the plan. When Qiguan Rang came over, he discreetly scanned their cheeks, lips, necks, and other places. After confirming that there were no suspicious traces, he bowed to Jiang Pengji and nodded to Wei Ci to greet him. He calmly took a seat at the head of the tent. Jiang Pengji said, I'm worried that Nieliang will lead his troops to attack Zhangjiang Pass in the near future. Qiguan Rang could not help but laugh in his heart. His lord had been mischievous a few times in a row. Even the most cultured person would explode, let alone a feudal lord. Wasn't it normal for Nieliang to lead his troops to attack? However, Nieliang's temperament determined that he would not put all his eggs in one basket if he was not confident. It's most likely a test, a feint attack. Don't panic, my lord. Jiang Pengji said, that's true, but we can't let the other party test our depth. Qiguan Rang asked, what does my lord want to do? Jiang Pengji said, discuss the matter of guarding the pass, how to arrange and settle the troops and supplies. Compared to defense, Jiang Pengji was better at attacking. She had not deeply studied ancient defensive tactics. It was safer to consult a professional about things that she did not understand. Qiguan Rang was undoubtedly the professional among professionals. Everyone knew that Nieliang would lead his troops to get back at them, but they did not expect Nieliang to act so quickly and impatiently. Wei Ci secretly sighed with emotion. His lord's ability to infuriate people was becoming more and more exquisite. He did not have much contact with Nieliang, but he more or less knew some things through the narration of his elder brother in his previous life. His lord could be proud that she could make Nieliang break through her power. Chapter 1478. Report. The messenger hurriedly ran out of the commander's tent. Jiang Pengji asked him, what's the matter? The enemy has gathered 70,000 men and horses outside the pass. They're only an hour away from us. Jiang Pengji had just gotten out of bed and washed up. She heard the news before she even had breakfast. She said, Nieliang is really fast. Looks like he's pissed off by me. Jiang Pengji didn't sound worried at all. Instead, she was full of pride and joy. She had kept her god-slaying sword for a long time. Even though she saw blood yesterday, it wasn't satisfying enough. Today, the enemy took the initiative to come to her door. If she didn't accept it, she would be letting down Nieliang's kindness. Quickly inform the whole army to prepare for battle. They had to fight a war, but they had to eat too. People were made of iron and rice was made of steel. They would starve if they skipped a meal. Jiang Pengji seized the time to eat. Her breakfast consisted of 10 plain white steamed buns, a stack of pickled vegetables, and a salted fish. She had a big appetite. She only felt full after eating 10 plain white steamed buns with pickled vegetables and salted fish. Many people in the streaming room liked to watch her eat. Seeing her eat with such relish, they had the illusion that instant noodles had become a delicacy. She finished her breakfast in 5 minutes. Everyone arrived one after another. The enemy was coming aggressively. Jiang Pengji and the others didn't waste any time. They followed Qiguan Rang's plan and defended the pass. On the city wall, Jiang Pengji stepped on the battlement and looked at the vast expanse of darkness at the end of the horizon. Can't I really lead the troops out of the pass to fight them? Qiguan Rang said coldly, no. If my lord goes down, do you think the gate will be closed or open? If it was closed, would they stay on the city wall and watch their lord being imprisoned? If it was open, they could support their lord at any time. Wouldn't that be opening a convenient door for the enemy to break through? If they wanted to go down to defend the city, their lord was really hopeless. Sun Wen, who was beside her, also had an indescribable expression. Jiang Pengji refreshed his understanding of the word lord at any time. After thinking about it, his grandson was still the best. He was obedient and obedient. When the enemy attacked the city, he could focus on doing his job. Although Sun Lan and Fengyi were young, they were more reliable. Sun Wen was very comforted. Jiang Pengji was chased off the city wall. She could only touch White's neck and sigh. My broadsword is hungry and thirsty, it can't withstand the little princess's prohibition. Dabai's hooves scraped against the ground, creating a shallow crater. Snorting was clearly a little anxious. Jiang Pengji kissed it and said, you want to kill the enemy with me, right? White barked like a human, as if agreeing with Jiang Pengji's words. The lifespan of a warhorse was limited. Its golden years were only a few years. When White was less than a year old, Lu Shi bought it and gave it to the original owner, Lu Shi. However, the original owner of the body liked to study and did not like to wear a military uniform. As a descendant of a warhorse, White could only be led to pull a carriage. After that, it followed Jiang Pengji and accompanied her on her expeditions. White's ferocious nature was completely liberated. Midway through, she got pregnant and went offline for a few years. Now that she had finally returned to the battlefield, she was not satisfied. White acted coquettishly towards Jiang Pengji, barking and licking her. He looked like he was clinging to her. Jiang Pengji could not resist Whitey's enthusiasm. She could only smile and promise to bring it along in the next battle. It's hard to forget the beauty's grace. As a horse's beauty, White's enthusiasm was indeed not something an ordinary person could withstand. At the same time, the main force of the Nya army was very close to Zhanjiang Pass. Looking at the densely packed enemy on the city wall, the general of the Nya army suddenly felt a sense of heroism. Get into formation. Even though his lord, Niel Yang, had given the order to feign an attack to test the enemy, he also hoped that Jiang Pengji would suffer some losses in today's battle. How are the preparations on the city wall? The city wall was a chaotic place. Jiang Pengji could guarantee her own safety, but Qiguan Rang and the others would not allow her to take risks. Therefore, she could only temporarily stay at the back and understand the situation at the front line through the messenger. Since she knew that they had to defend the pass, Jiang Pengji ordered people to build trenches and temporary barricades outside Zhanjiang Pass to assist in defending the city. The messenger said, the military counselor said that everything is ready. Jiang Pengji asked again, how many archers did the enemy bring? How many weapons do they have? Zhongzhao's military force had always been the strongest among the 5 countries. Whether it was the quality of the soldiers, combat power, or the technical level of the weapons, they surpassed the other 4 countries. This was also the main reason why Zhongzhao could intimidate the other countries. After Zhongzhao was destroyed, the Nya family successively recovered various places and took over the military forces left behind by the royal family of Zhongzhao. Their overall strength could not be underestimated. Even if it was a feint, Jiang Pengji would not let down her guard. The messenger was prepared and answered in detail. Jiang Pengji took a deep breath. She could only suppress her emotions and continue to wait for the battle report from the front line. She believed that Qiguan Rang and Sun Wen would not let Niao Yang take advantage of them if they joined forces. However, the battlefield was ever-changing, and no one could guarantee anything. Jiang Pengji's hearing was excellent. Even if she stayed at the back, she could vaguely hear the war drums and shouts from the front line. Listening to the movements, the two sides seemed to be in a stalemate. Although the enemy was feigning an attack, they were serious. The Nye army led the way with wooden carriages equipped with thick shields to resist the tide-like rain of arrows falling from the city wall. The soldiers took the opportunity to advance, approaching the city wall of Zhangjiang Pass with scaling ladders. Although there were several trenches, they could not stop them for long. The enemy used wooden planks to level the ground and smoothly crossed over. Qiguan Rang was not surprised when he saw the situation. He ordered the soldiers to control the bed crossbows and shoot at the people in the designated positions. The penetrating power of the ballistae was much stronger than that of the arrows. A thick arrow landed on the wooden carriage's shield, instantly piercing through the shield and the carriage. The force of the arrow was so great that it instantly destroyed the chariot. However, as soon as a gap appeared, the Nye army's soldiers immediately filled it with bronze shields. Qiguan Rang said, "How are the rolling stones and burning oil?" The deputy general said, "Everything is ready." "Don't worry, military counselor." Qiguan Rang was not under much pressure. The enemy's advance was not fast. The situation on Sun Wen's side was similar. After the two sides fought for a while, the general of the Nye army realized something was wrong. He realized that the enemy's archery was terrifyingly accurate, especially those thick arrows. They had a long range, great strength, and high accuracy. These were not enough to make him feel afraid, but the enemy's combat power was beyond his expectations. The communication was too backward. The distance between Dongqing and Zhongzhou was not close. Even if Niao Yang made Jiang Pengji the number one enemy to pay attention to, the speed of gathering information between the two places could not keep up with the speed of upgrading the woodworking workshop. Fighting a war was not only about manpower and logistics, but also about the level of technology. In the past, because everyone's level was low, the difference could not be seen. Now it was different. Jiang Pengji spent a huge amount of money on the woodworking workshop every year. If Zhang Ping and the others did not give her some real goods, would she give up? Because of the inconvenience of communication, the information held by the two families was not equal. Of course, not every soldier could be equipped with sophisticated equipment such as crossbows. Jiang Pengji did not have that much money. Chapter 1479. #Oh my God, Her Majesty's tomb has been opened. Wei Si's face was deathly still. He clenched his teeth and stood at the entrance of the imperial mausoleum. He did not know what had happened. In the blink of an eye, the warm spring of March had turned into July. The unfamiliar environment made him tremble. When he saw the introduction in front of the imperial mausoleum, he felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. He was angry and sad. The Jiang dynasty had a total of 13 emperors. The imperial mausoleum was called the Qin Mausoleum, and it was the only imperial mausoleum that was open to the public. Wei Si did not know what kind of mentality the descendants of the later generations had. They actually allowed the imperial mausoleum to be visited and disturbed the peace of the ancestors. It was really... Thinking about it, he did not know what words to use to express the grief and anger in his heart. He could only hold the ticket tightly. He was pushed through the inspection like a piece of wood and entered the first door of the imperial mausoleum. Although it was an imperial mausoleum, the layout did not feel gloomy, but it was not extravagant either. Instead, it looked spacious and simple. There was a long stone corridor leading to the imperial mausoleum. The two walls were carved with the great and small deeds of the great ancestor from her youth to her old age. Passing through the stone corridor seemed to be looking at her life. As one of the famous tourist attractions in the country, the Imperial Mausoleum had a limit on the number of tourists it could receive every day. The tickets were often in short supply. Wei Ci followed the crowd for about 100 meters and saw several tour groups. The tour guides were introducing the historical deeds represented by the murals to the tourists. Wei Ci pursed his lips and staggered forward. His pale face made him look like a ghost in the Imperial Mausoleum. He heard one of the tour guides say, "The mural we are looking at now is the famous great ancestor's admonition." It warned the young emperor of the time not to hold a grand funeral. All the funerary objects should be replaced with ordinary clay. No living people, jade, gold, silver, copper, iron, and the like should be buried with them. This also became a custom passed down by the Jiang dynasty emperors. According to historical records, the most extravagant emperor in the history of the Jiang dynasty was Jiang Renzong. The funerary objects were only 2 more pure gold medals than his ancestors. This also made the funerary customs of the Jiang dynasty extremely simple. At the same time, the imperial mausoleum of this period was also the last target of the tomb raiders because there was no profit at all. The imperial mausoleum could be considered poor, but the area was not small. It was divided into 5 parts. The stone corridor recorded the events of the emperor's life, the main tomb, where the emperor's coffin was buried, the abode, where the emperor's calligraphy was buried, the official hall, where the statues of the emperor's ministers were placed, and finally, the outer hall, where the statues of thousands of soldiers were placed. According to historical records, except for the current empress, the tombs of the previous 12 emperors were exactly the same. Opening the Qin mausoleum was equivalent to looking at the tombs of the other 11 emperors. Wei Ci followed the crowd and walked through the stone corridor. There were many people, but fortunately, his body was tall enough to stand out from the crowd. He endured the redness in his eyes as he stood in a corner at the end of the stone corridor, slowly calming down. At this moment, he heard a young female voice speak out the voice in his heart. A great humiliation. Although the imperial family had handed over their authority and become a constitutional monarch, they were not completely dead. They were actually forced to open their ancestors' mausoleum. Wei Ci tilted his head and looked at the source of the voice. He saw a 6 or 7-year-old girl with a straight face and slightly red eyes. "Do you think it's a humiliation too?" Wei Ci asked her. The girl said, "Isn't it?" Wei Ci saw that the girl looked kind and even had the urge to get close to her. "There are too many people here. Shall I take you somewhere else to wait for your family to come?" There were too many kidnappers. This girl was so pretty, so she might be unlucky. The girl glanced at him, pursed her lips, and held out her hand. Wei Ci held her hand and walked forward. He asked casually, "Why did you say it's a great humiliation just now?" The girl said coldly, "Nearly 100 years ago, the power of the people rose and encouraged the people to force the imperial family to reform. The imperial family's influence gradually weakened. The empress of that generation made a decision and took the initiative to sign a constitutional monarch treaty. However, the imperial family is still the imperial family. There are always people who are worried that the empress will return, so they repeatedly tested the bottom line. The imperial family had already delegated power. Besides a small amount of military power, they basically had no other reliance. They had no choice but to compromise. More than 20 years ago, the mausoleum of Emperor Qin collapsed. The outside world wanted to send experts to intervene in the restoration of the mausoleum under the pretext of protecting the mausoleum so that they could study the history of that period. Then, they made an unreasonable request to make it a scenic spot. Wei Ci trembled. That's too much. Then why did they delegate power and establish a constitution? Because. The girl tilted her head and pondered for a while. She said sadly, "Times are always moving forward. The imperial family can't keep up with the changes. If they stubbornly seize the power of the imperial family and don't let go, they are bound to fight against the trend of the entire era. One of the two has to be sacrificed. The imperial family chose to sacrifice their own interests. On one hand, they are thinking about the stability of the entire country. On the other hand, they are also thinking about long-term survival. There was no change that didn't require blood and sacrifice, unless one side took the initiative to give in and allow the change to happen. Wei Ci felt like a fish bone was stuck in his throat. He almost didn't know how to respond. But the girl's expression suddenly became more severe. She muttered, "The imperial family giving in doesn't mean that they don't remember this feud. Delegating power doesn't mean that they will really be trampled on by others. The feud of being forced to open the mausoleum of the ancestors will be settled sooner or later." The core of this era was technology. The imperial family had never lost in this. Sooner or later, the power of capital that rose during the chaos would lose all the underwear of their ancestors. Ancestors? A trace of astonishment flashed in Wei Ci's eyes. Before he could think more, two mature women with excellent temperaments blocked their way. Crown Princess Huichang. The girl asked coldly, "Can't I come to visit the ancestors during the Dragon Boat Festival?" At this moment, Wei Ci realized that the girl was holding a string of dumplings in her other hand. This girl was indeed, "Madam is angry that you ran away from home without saying anything," the girl said. "It's not the first day she knows that I like to run away from home. At most, she will go back and punish me." The two empresses from the time of the Constitution were quite gentle and soft, at least on the surface. The girl's mother appeared to be good-tempered to outsiders. Who knew how cruel she was when she was angry and hit her daughter? "I'll be back after I put the dumplings in." The main mausoleum of Emperor Chen was not open to the public unless it was a special occasion, but the descendants of the imperial family could come to worship their ancestors. Wei Ci found something strange. The two women who called the girl, Crown Princess Huichang, didn't see him. The girl pulled Wei Ci through the secret passage to the main mausoleum of the Imperial Mausoleum. The surroundings were empty, except for the lights near the dome. There was only one coffin in the main mausoleum of the Imperial Mausoleum, but there were two corpses buried in it. Other than the direct descendants of the imperial family, no one knew the identity of the other male corpse. Some gossip experts did all kinds of research, but unfortunately, they didn't guess correctly. The girl was baffled. The male corpse in the coffin was also her ancestor. To put it bluntly, it was her family matter. What was the point of outsiders studying it? Wei Ci saw the girl put the two dumplings on a plate and respectfully saluted her. She said, "This is the first time I've seen my ancestor's spirit. The portrait left by my ancestor is quite realistic. Otherwise, I wouldn't have recognized it." Wei Ci was speechless. This child was a bit smart. "I'm here to see her." "What happens after you see her?" Chapter 1480. Even if it was a tentative attack, the troops under Nieliang's command were not pushovers. They actually put a certain amount of pressure on Zhangjiang Pass. However, Qiguan Rang had considered this long ago. He made full use of the terrain of Zhangjiang Pass. While commanding on the city wall, he ordered the archers and soldiers who operated the crossbows to focus on attacking the weakest parts of the enemy's formation. Combined with the terrain, the speed of Nieliang's army's advance was greatly reduced. Jiang Pengji waited at the back for a while. She could not sit still anymore. Although the messengers would send back the important information of the battlefield, it was not as good as seeing it with her own eyes. It's been almost 15 minutes. The enemy still has no intention of retreating? At present, there were not many casualties on both sides. When Nieliang's army set up ladders and covered the battering pillars to hit the city gate, the casualties would increase dramatically. Because it would be crowded at that time, even a blind man could kill two birds with one stone. When the attacking side climbed the wall using ladders or ropes, the defending side would knock people down. According to the height of the city gate of Zhangjiang Pass, it would basically be a child falling down. If they really entered this stage, the losses of Niel Yang's army would be much greater than now. Jiang Pengji muttered, "It's just a feint. Why work so hard?" She was bored out of her mind. The salted fish in the streaming room were even more bored than her. The battle report was not exciting enough. They wanted to watch the battle at the front line. Just listening to the battle report felt like scratching an itch. It was better not to listen, but it was even more uncomfortable. Fitness Darren, "Hey, why is Niel Yang working so hard this time?" Streamer, "Don't you have any idea? If she didn't anger Niel Yang, why would he be so angry?" Slimming Gazai, "I now feel like a player who participated in the World Cup but sat on the bench from beginning to end. He watched his teammates gallop on the field, but he could only be moldy from idleness." Isn't the streamer a husky? Can you stand squatting at the back? Although many salted fish complained that the streaming room was too bloody and violent, there were also many salted fish who liked it. Jiang Pengji was a battle maniac who fought on the front line, but now she was sitting on the bench. Those salted fish felt bad for her. The salted fish fanned the flames. Jiang Pengji was someone who could not sit still. She immediately decided to climb up the city wall and join in. Everyone, the flames of war raged on the city walls. The enemy army had already set up ladders in an attempt to scale the walls and fight. Qiguan Rang and his companion were able to keep their composure. The enemy did not panic after setting up the ladder. They waited for them to climb 2/3 of the way up before pushing the ladder down. The ropes they threw up were treated the same way. However, the same method did not work every time. The enemies swarmed over like hornets and gathered under the city walls. The enemy archers used arrows that had been smeared with black oil to disrupt the guards on the walls. At the same time, they provided cover for the soldiers climbing the walls. Their coordination was excellent. The area of the city walls was limited, and the number of guards was naturally limited as well. If these people panicked, they would not be able to effectively push the enemy down, and the city walls would definitely fall. Qiguan Rang and Sun Wen would not make such a mistake. The soldiers under Jiang Pengji's command were the most obedient. They had been brainwashed by the camp's political commissar for a few years after they entered the military camp. Even if they were all afraid of death, when the horn sounded, they would still rush forward, because their bodies had already formed a reflex response to the command. Sun Wen was still merciful. He ordered the soldiers in the watchtower to observe the abnormal movements of the enemy's rear defense line. He also ordered the archers to divide into 3 waves. The first wave would shoot at the enemy archers at the front line below the city walls. After shooting, they would retreat half a step and let another wave of archers fill in the gaps as much as possible. The third wave was responsible for the enemies who tried to climb up the city walls. In addition, there were soldiers holding red-tasseled spears. They aimed at the enemy's eyes, cheeks, throats, and other parts and directly stabbed them down. There seemed to be many soldiers on the city walls, but the rhythm of the battle was fast and steady. Qiguan Rang's side was much more ruthless. Not only did archers and soldiers with long spears interfere with climbing the walls, but he also poured water and burned charcoal. When a basin of boiling hot water was poured down, the faces of the soldiers at the top of the ladders were basically scalded. The soldiers at the bottom were not only hit in the face by objects thrown from high up in the sky, but the unlucky ones were also splashed by hot water and charcoal. If it was not for the lack of time, Qiguan Rang wanted to embed iron caltrops on the battlements of the city walls. If the enemy dared to climb the wall, their hands and feet would be pierced and bloody. However, this proposal was rejected by his lord. The reason was simple. Iron caltrops are not made of iron. In addition to these routine operations, Qiguan Rang also hung iron planks covered with thick iron nails on the city walls. The soldiers only needed to loosen the ropes to stab the iron planks at the enemies who tried to climb the wall. When they pulled the ropes back, the corpses of the enemies, which were riddled with holes, would be knocked down the city walls. After a wave of probing, the enemies could not successfully climb the city walls. On the other hand, Niao Liang carefully noted down the defensive objects used by the enemies on the city walls. The first wave of attack did not gain much of an advantage. Nie Jun did not give up. Instead, he ordered the soldiers to push dozens of catapults. The catapults of this era were not Jiang Pengji's original creation. They were also used on a large scale during the war. They could be considered a weapon of mass destruction in war. The giant catapults she used to attack Chang'an district had been improved several times. Their overall performance, whether it was the accuracy of the fixed-point projectiles, the projectile distance, or the force of the attack, was much higher than the average standard of this era. Of course, as a big country among the 5 countries, Zhongzhao's technological level was not low. Even if the power of the catapults in front of them was not as good as the ones prepared by Jiang Pengji, they were not weak. Thinking of this, Qiguan Rang, who had originally planned to hide his trump card, had no choice but to reveal one of his trump cards. The size and transportation of the catapults were a big problem. Jiang Pengji asked Zhang Ping and the others to research other models of catapults. They gave up a certain carrying capacity in exchange for a longer throwing distance and more dexterity, further simplifying the operation. The simplified operation meant that the time from loading, throwing, and firing of the catapults was shortened. When the enemy fired one shot, their side could throw 3 times and adjust the angle of the projectile. Who wouldn't hurt each other? Although the power of the catapults was great, Zhangjiang Pass was a dangerous pass. The stones used to build the city walls were huge stones used to build the Great Wall. They were huge and dense. It was difficult for ordinary heavy objects to pose a threat. Niao Liang's army had obviously considered this point, so they aimed at the soldiers on the city walls. Because of the height of the city walls, the distance of the catapults could not be too far, which happened to be within the range of the ballistae on the city walls. Wen Zheng ordered the soldiers to aim at the joints of their catapults. Qiguan Rang's expression was solemn. Seeing the enemy deploy the catapults, he was already in a bad mood. When he heard the familiar voice, he almost choked. "My lord. It's dangerous here. Please leave immediately." Qiguan Rang was well aware of the power of the catapults. Even if his side retaliated, the casualties would not be reduced. Chapter 1481. Jiang Pengji looked helpless. She said, "Don't panic. Do you know how to be steady?" Qiguan Rang's most precious feather fan was thrown aside. If he was not rational, he would have carried her away. Whether he could win or not, that was another matter. "My lord," Jiang Pengji said, "if you have the time to persuade me, do as I say. Order people to adjust the angle of attack and aim at the joints of the enemy's catapult. As long as their catapult is destroyed, the crisis will naturally be resolved. If not, order people to use fire arrows." Most catapult carts were made of wood. It was not that it was bad to use metal, but because the smelting technology was not good, there was not much copper and iron produced. If the catapult was made of metal, it would not be easy to transport in war. The cost was high, so wood was better. Because it was made of wood, the joints were either tied with mortise and tenon or thick ropes. The former was fine, but the latter was easy to loosen. If fire arrows or crossbows were used to aim at the joints, they should be able to hit the enemy's catapult. If one arrow did not work, use 2 arrows. If 2 arrows did not work, use 3 arrows. They could not be restricted and let the enemy attack freely. Qiguan Rang saw that his lord was unmoved and could only sigh. He was secretly prepared to apologize. If his lord was injured, he would be the scapegoat. Who asked him to not be able to persuade his lord? Instead, he indulged her. Yes. Qiguan Rang immediately passed down the order. While continuing to target the enemy who tried to climb the wall, some people were sent to deal with the catapult. Jiang Pengji said, "Fortunately, we are defending the city. The catapult can be covered by the wall. Otherwise, it would most likely be the same result." Qiguan Rang was speechless. To be honest, he knew about burning the catapult. If Jiang Pengji did not come, he would have done the same, but to aim at the joints, Qiguan Rang understood a little. Why did his lord like carpentry so much? It was not without its benefits. The enemy used the catapult to attack the city. Naturally, they would not carelessly leave an empty space. The catapult was also heavily protected. Jiang Pengji asked a soldier operating the crossbow to stand up and give his seat to her. Although she could not kill to her heart's content, she could also show off her archery skills. Seeing this, Qiguan Rang could only sigh and ask the soldiers to protect her to prevent her from being injured by stray arrows. The power of the ballistae was obvious to all, not to mention the fact that the ballistae they were using now were the strengthened version that had been improved several times. Not only did it have additional parts to assist in aiming, but its shooting range was also much better than the original version. The battle cries were deafening outside, but Jiang Pengji had no distractions. All she had to do was aim and fire. This version of the bed crossbow also had an enhanced continuous firing function. There was no need to stop shooting when reloading the arrows, because there were other soldiers helping to reload. For the sake of safety, the other soldiers who operated the ballistae chose to attack the base or other fixed parts of the catapult. Jiang Pengji chose to attack the lever of the catapult. Even though the lever could move, for Jiang Pengji, a fixed target and a moving target were the same. In addition, choosing the lever as a target also had its advantages. At the very least, it wouldn't be as crowded as the base. From the perspective of the salted fish, they did not even know which catapult Jiang Pengji had chosen, let alone the location of the catapult. When she shot several arrows at lightning speed, each arrow hitting the same part of the throwing lever, the salted fish could only cheer for Jiang Pengji. Meng Xian Xiao Kuai, I gracefully present this year's knee to the streamer. Please accept it. Qi Qingqing, as a salted fish, can I ask a question in a low voice? Why are you cheering for me again? The battlefield was chaotic. Every salted fish had a different focus. The streaming room was a live broadcast, so it was impossible to replay it. Therefore, many salted fish did not know what had happened. They just followed suit and cheered for her. Anyway, it couldn't be wrong. Xinxiang warning, with my excellent dynamic vision, I can responsibly tell you how awesome the streamer's operation is. That soul imprint just now was simply too cool. At the same time that the enemy's catapult shot, the streamer shot several arrows and broke the throwing lever. The lever broke, and the catapult did not have enough strength. It fell from the sky and hit the enemy's camp. Such a huge rock could probably smash 3 or 4 people into meat paste. Jiang Pengji pursed her lips tightly and asked someone to adjust the angle to another catapult within the shooting range. Huge rocks were thrown from above and below the city walls. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. Jiang Pengji's hands were still steady and she did not sweat. With a series of maneuvers, she accurately destroyed 5 of the enemy's catapults. The pressure on the city walls within the range of the 5 catapults was instantly reduced. The other soldiers also had some gains. When the pressure on their side was reduced, the pressure on the enemy soared. Niao Liang, who was supervising the battle from the rear, frowned deeply. His pale face made the green in his eyes look even more terrifying. My lord, Niao Liang said, I underestimated Lu Shi's ability. In less than 15 minutes, the enemy had successively destroyed the catapults within a small area. It was obvious that the enemy had a general with superb archery skills. Every one of these catapults had been broken by the enemy's attack on their weak points during the process of being launched. The battlefield was chaotic, and it took a lot of time to replace the throwing lever. It was almost equivalent to being useless. Why haven't I heard of such a person in Lu Shi's camp before? This kind of archery skill was used to defend the city and greatly limited the catapults of the attacking side. It was simply a nightmare. Niao Liang saw that no one answered and sighed. Forget it. It's about time for today. The number of catapults they brought to attack the city this time was not many. The enemy was so good at dismantling them. The possibility of successfully attacking the city was almost zero. Niel Yang was not a stubborn person who sought victory. He clearly remembered the real purpose of today. He lowered his eyes and issued several orders. The depth of his eyes seemed to be like a bottomless abyss. Not long after, Qiguan Rang and the others also realized that the enemy's attack had slowed down. It seemed that they had the intention of retreating. After fighting for 2 hours, the total number of casualties on both sides was close to 7,000. If they continued to waste time, none of them would have an advantage. Niel Yang's side was feigning an attack. They had enough people, but they did not bring enough military supplies. Their endurance was worrying. Jiang Pengji also had a few batches of supplies on the way. If they continued to carry them, they would inevitably face the predicament of not having enough supplies to defend the city. They were relieved that Niel Yang had retreated. Jiang Pengji watched for a while, but she had a bad feeling in her heart. Qiguan Rang also said, Niel Yang suffered such a big loss yesterday. If he retreated without a winner being decided today, wouldn't it be? Thinking of this, he felt that Niel Yang still had a trick up his sleeve. That's right. At this moment, what trick could Niel Yang have? Jiang Pengji stood on the city wall and looked down. She suddenly remembered something when she saw a pile of corpses piled up high. Wenzheng. Your subject is here. Quickly order people to prepare water. Take preventive measures. Jiang Pengji said, I suddenly thought of Gemin Pass. Chapter 1482. Gemin Pass? Qiguan Rang frowned. He seemed to remember something and asked in surprise, My lord, do you mean to attack with fire? Jiang Pengji pointed at the corpses piled up at the foot of the city wall. Some were dead, some were still breathing, but their injuries were too severe. They were probably struggling at death's door. She said, although there's no dry wood nearby to help with the burning, it's not easy to put out these corpses when they burn. That was the only guess Jiang Pengji had left after thinking about it. She didn't know if she had guessed correctly, but it was better to be prepared. It was better to be more vigilant. Qiguan Rang didn't dare to delay and immediately gave the order. Although they reacted fast enough, they still couldn't keep up with the changes on the battlefield. Niel Yang didn't retreat immediately. Instead, he chose to retreat while fighting. He wanted to maintain order and reduce casualties as much as possible. When two armies fought, retreat was also important. If one side was defeated and fled without a second thought, it was basically over. The enemy could take advantage of the chaos and chase after them. Especially when they met someone like Jiang Pengji who loved to fight. Even if she was the general guarding the pass, she would lead her troops out of the pass to chase after the enemy. How could they reduce casualties and deter the enemy from chasing after them? Of course, it was to send people to stall the enemy and fight while retreating. Only by maintaining the army's formation could they reduce losses. Exposing one's back to the enemy without taking any precautions was tantamount to handing over one's life to the enemy. Niel Yang naturally wouldn't make such a mistake. While they retreated, the rain of arrows on the city wall didn't stop. The enemy slowly retreated more than 30 meters, but Jiang Pengji didn't dare to let her guard down. She frowned even more. Just a small fire attack. Niel Yang looked at the city wall. Although he couldn't see who was standing on it, he was sure that Jiang Pengji was paying attention to the situation at the front like him. Of course, he remembered the humiliation yesterday. Today, he pretended to attack to test the enemy's strength, but he also wanted to get back at her. Unfortunately, Jiang Pengji was too cautious. She had already cleaned up the forest near Zhangjiang Pass. If not for this great fire might have surrounded the entire Zhangjiang Pass. It was a southeast wind that day. The wind wasn't strong, but it was just right for Niel Yang. Thousands of archers shot arrows at the corpses below the city wall. Wave after wave, none of the arrows reached the battlements. Some soldiers who didn't know what was going on couldn't help but laugh. What was the use of shooting rockets at a dead person? Jiang Pengji's face turned solemn because she smelled a familiar pungent smell in the wind. It was easy to miss if one did not smell it carefully. Both sides had used fire arrows during the battle. As a result, the battlefield was filled with thick smoke. Some unlucky corpses were hit, and their clothes and corpses gave off a burnt smell. Under the cover of this smell, the smell of black oil, kerosene, and sulfur was easily ignored. Jiang Pengji stood on the city wall and looked down. She scanned her surroundings. After a while, she found that the clothes worn by the enemy's corpses were a little strange. Some of the soldiers even had firewood wrapped around their waists. The firewood was bound in linen cloth that had been washed with black oil. The scene of the battle between the two armies was extremely chaotic. Neither the supervisors nor the frontline soldiers noticed this, so it was easy to overlook it. This Niao Yang, Jiang Pengji clenched her fists. On the other side, Sun Wen, who was supervising the battle, also noticed that the speed at which the corpses were burning was abnormal. In the span of a few breaths, the small flame had turned into a towering blaze that quickly spread. If the city wall of Zhangjiang Pass had not been made of huge stones, the fire would have reached it. Seeing that Zhangjiang Pass in the distance was surrounded by orange flames that soared into the sky, Niao Yang's depressed mood eased a little. Zixuan, send someone to investigate which General Lu she promoted after this battle. On the battlefield, he could consecutively destroy several catapults in a very short period of time. Such archery skills could be considered valiant anywhere. He might not become the main general to lead the troops to kill the enemy, but he would not be a nobody. It was impossible for Jiang Pengji not to reward him generously for his meritorious service. Niao Yang only needed to send someone to pay attention to who was promoted and rewarded. He could basically lock onto his target. Wei Yong agreed in a low voice. He saw that Niao Yang's complexion had improved a little, and his mood also relaxed a lot. There's one thing that we need to pay attention to. The catapults under Lu Shi's command are obviously better than ours. Their power is extraordinary. Niao Yang's feigned attack was not only to regain his dignity, but also to find out the enemy's background and see what cards they had up their sleeves. When the enemy showed off the catapults, he did not pay attention, but he soon discovered that the frequency and distance of the catapults on the enemy's city wall were much higher than his own. If he only discovered this during the final battle, he would definitely be caught off guard by the enemy. He could still make up for it now. Wei Yong said, Lu Shi values the Mahists very much. He is very respectful to the scholars who are from the Mahists under his command. It is expected that the catapults are powerful. I'm just worried that other than the catapults, they are still hiding other killing moves that they have yet to reveal. Niao Yang asked him, did the spies we sent out find out any relevant information? Lu Shi is extremely cautious in his work, and he is very strict in guarding the supplies. No matter who it is, they need to show their token and register their name to enter and exit. Our spies can't find out more. Wei Yong shook his head regretfully and changed the topic. However, a few years ago, before Lu Shi grew up, I did leave a trick up my sleeve and ordered a few men of sacrifice to sneak into Dongqing. They seem to have gained a lot and are currently on their way back secretly. Niao Yang said, Zixuan is still more thoughtful. Wei Yong shook his head and sighed. No, it's only because of my third brother. That one called Wei Ci? Niao Yang still remembered Wei Ci. After all, there were not many men with such charm in the world. He was a person who left a deep impression. Speaking of which, Wei Ci could be considered as Niao Yang's savior. If Wei Ci had not taken his pulse, Niao Yang might have only realized that he had been tampered with before he died. Even if the lord chosen by Zixiao doesn't show it on the outside, there must be something extraordinary about her. We have to guard against her. If Jiang Pengji knew about this news, she might be angry for a while. In fact, Jiang Pengji was very angry now. The fire spread very quickly. Even though Qiguan Rang had sent people to fetch water, Niao Yang used black oil and other substances to ignite the fire. There were thousands of corpses burning underneath. It was impossible to extinguish the fire by relying on manpower. There was something that was even more annoying. When the enemy soldiers climbed the ladder for the last time, they secretly pierced the sack containing the black oil and let the black oil flow down the city wall. When the corpses below formed a big fire, the flames ignited the black oil on the city wall. The flames climbed up from below and spread to the towers and watchtowers on the city wall. For a moment, everyone was in a sorry state. Even so, Jiang Pengji could only suppress her anger and order people to move the injured soldiers and catapults on the city wall. Chapter 1483. The wind fanned the flames, and the fire burned vigorously. Even from far away, one could see the thick smoke rising into the sky from Zhangjiang Pass. Jiang Pengji and the rest looked calm. Not to mention them, the soldiers under the tent did not have any reaction. Those who were supposed to put out the fire did so, those who were supposed to move the injured soldiers did so, and those who were supposed to move the catapult carts did so. The mental fortitude of the idle fish in the live broadcast room was not as strong. Many salted fish covered their mouths and vomited after watching for a while. Especially when Jiang Pengji said, "There's the smell of cooked meat in the air," the entire bullet screen stopped. She had been chased off the city gate tower by Qiguan Rang and was feeling gloomy. When she saw the salted fish's reaction, her depressed mood rose a few notches. Host V, no way. How many years have you been with me? What kind of bloody and violent scenes have you not seen? This is just a small matter. Calm down. There were some things that the more one saw, the more one would naturally calm down. They were still lacking in knowledge. Jiang Pengji spoke casually, as if what was burning outside was not thousands of corpses but thousands of suckling pigs. Tudu Feiqiu, you can never get used to this kind of thing. After all, the environment is different. Gui Kai Guo Fengshao, once again, I'm impressed. I can travel to another world, but not in the ancient times. If I have to be in the ancient times, I can't be in troubled times. If I have to be in troubled times, I can't be a soldier. If I have to be a soldier, I can't be a pawn. The victory of the two feudal vassals was basically piled up with the lives of the soldiers at the bottom. It wasn't that the host wasn't good, it was just that as a pawn, he really didn't have any future. Yen Tianmen Grand Uncle Master, speaking of time travel, I suddenly remembered that the next round of Dream of 1,000 Years will start the day after tomorrow. Puff up proud flat chest, he's a lucky emperor after all. His treatment shouldn't be that bad. It'll be a pain in the ass if he's sent to the battlefield. Yu Long Yin, aren't they afraid of being thrown into the battlefield? Are they deserters? If they meet the streamer, maybe they can ask for her autograph and take a picture with her. The salted fish were the best at straying from the topic. Just a moment ago, they were trembling in fear, covering their mouths and vomiting. Now that their attention was diverted, they immediately began to imagine the identity of the next, Dream of 1,000 Years, lucky emperor. Some people teased, while others immediately came up with interesting jokes. Looking at the streaming room that had returned to normal, Jiang Pengji snorted secretly. She was really bored out of her mind. She was actually worried about these salted fishes not adapting well. They were clearly adapting well. She, on the other hand, should be the one worrying. Once again, I'm impressed by my brilliance. Jiang Pengji glanced at the god-slaying saber in her hand and sighed. If I hadn't cut down the nearby trees in advance, I don't know how long this fire would have lasted. Perhaps Niel Yang would have been able to take advantage of the situation and break through. Just as she was feeling emotional, the old general's private message rang. Your Abba, it's going to rain soon. This is really the work of the chosen one. Jiang Pengji's face was full of questions. Rain? At this time? She looked up at the sky. It had been dark since morning. She could see that it had been raining recently, but not today. The old chief quickly sent her another message, mocking Jiang Pengji's failure in geography. Your Abba, even though you're already the Legion commander and the future marshal of the Federation, and no one will question your education background. Don't let the cat out of the bag. Didn't you notice that the terrain of Zhangjiang Pass is very strange? The pass is narrow, the hinterland is wide, the mountains on both sides are high and steep, and the middle is low. This kind of terrain is quite bad in terms of air circulation. It should have been raining on your side, but the fire accelerated the formation of the rainwater. In my opinion, at this rate, it will rain in half an hour at most. Don't you think you should prepare for it? Jiang Pengji also heard it, and she suddenly looked a little embarrassed. I entered the children's military school when I was very young. Within 2 years, I was directly recruited into the genetic warrior training camp. It's normal for me to fail my cultural classes. Jiang Pengji began to act shamelessly. How could she admit that she was not cultured enough? Really? It will rain in half an hour? The dear old chief only gave her the 8 syllables. It was up to her whether she believed it or not. Jiang Pengji, you're the top student, you're right. She was thinking about how to manipulate the situation when a gust of wind came in. My lord, I have something to report. Jiang Pengji said, coincidentally, I also have something to tell you. Wei Ci said, my lord, you may speak first. Jiang Pengji said, I have a premonition that it's going to rain soon. Wei Ci could not help but laugh. Coincidentally, I want to talk about this too. After the fire was ignited, the southeast wind, which was originally gentle, grew stronger. The wind fueled the fire, and it burned even more fiercely at the pass. The sky, which was initially bright, seemed to be covered with a layer of black gauze, and there was a faint trend of rain. Jiang Pengji smiled evilly. I hope that before the fire is extinguished, it will rain, even if it's just a drizzle. Exactly, Wei Ci said, at least the enemy will know. Jiang Pengji said to him, one is marked by the company one keeps. The ancients did not deceive me. Wei Ci was also black-hearted. If Nieliang really knew, he would be so angry that he would be in trouble. It was not easy to get back at them with the fire, but who knew that the heavens would not give them face and send rain to help Jiang Pengji and the others extinguish the fire. Although this was a normal change in the weather, with a little use of public opinion, the image of their lord as the child of destiny could be created in an instant. Once it was confirmed, the soldiers under Nieliang's tent would probably be restless for a while. They were naturally not afraid of fighting with others, but if they were to fight with the child of destiny chosen by the heavens, would there be any hope of victory? Once the morale of the army was shaken, the morale would also be low. Jiang Pengji was used to using her advantages, so she would naturally not let go of this marketing opportunity. She looked at Wei Ci and said, Zixiao, do you think I should set up an altar or perform a sword dance to pray for rain? It would be more effective. Wei Ci said, no, if there is no rain, won't the Lord be passive? Even if Wei Ci was 90% confident, he dared not joke around with Jiang Pengji's reputation. Wei Ci rejected it, and Jiang Pengji did not insist. She did not like to dance. The two of them muttered. Qiguan Rang and the others were in a much more difficult situation. Old Master Sun Wen was sent away due to his old age, so he could not leave at will. His originally fair and clean face was smoked black, and the beard that he carefully groomed every day was also a little burnt. Because the fire could not be controlled, Qiguan Rang could only retreat from the danger zone. The medic saw that the back of his hand was red and swollen, and he suggested, military advisor, the back of your hand is swollen. Why don't you apply some ointment on it first? Qiguan Rang agreed. When the medic applied ointment on his hand, a drop of water fell on his eyelashes. He blinked subconsciously, and after a while, another drop of water fell between his eyebrows. Qiguan Rang widened his eyes in shock, and he asked the medic with difficulty. Do you feel anything? There seemed to be raindrops just now. At this moment. Chapter 1484. It's not an illusion, it's really raining. Qiguan Rang, who was always calm, did not care that the medics were still bandaging his wounds. He suddenly raised his hands high and pretended to catch the rain. The rain changed very quickly. At first, it was a drizzle, but soon it became a torrential downpour, drenching him from head to toe. Qiguan Rang did not care about his current embarrassing appearance. He could not help but hold his knees with both hands and bend over to laugh. He laughed so hard that he almost cried. On the other side, Sun Wen also ran into the rain. His eyes were filled with shock and surprise. He could not believe what he saw. Grandpa, Sun Lan secretly ran over because she was worried about Sun Wen. She happened to see her grandfather running into the rain. The rain is so heavy. Why don't you find a place to hide? An old man's body was incomparable to a young man's. Sun Lan was really worried that his grandfather would fall ill in the rain. He could not take the shock. He used the umbrella in his hand to shelter Sun Wen from the rain. He did not care that most of his clothes were wet. Sun Lan said, "I'll take you to shelter from the rain first. I'll cook a bowl of ginger soup later to ward off the cold." Sun Wen laughed heartily as he gave his grandson a tight hug. He patted his grandson's back and said with a smile, "Today was really a joyous day. This rain couldn't have come at a better time. Ha ha ha, I can't wait to see how ugly Niao Yang and the others' faces are." Sun Wen and the Nia family had a deep grudge. Even if Niao Yang was not a real enemy, he was still a disciple of the Nia family. They were on opposing sides. It was hard to say who would win the battle that day, but Niao Yang set a big fire before he left, which made Jiang Pengji's side very embarrassed. Who knew that even the heavens could not stand it anymore? It rained heavily in time and suppressed the rapid fire. It was simply rain from the gods. Sun Wen had not laughed so freely in a long time since he left Zhongzhou and came to Dongqing. Sun Lan felt a lump in her throat when she heard her grandfather being so happy. After much persuasion, the old man was finally appeased. When the grandfather and grandson went to the commander's tent, they happened to meet Qiguan Rang, who came in the rain. Sun Wen exchanged greetings with him, smiled, and modestly offered a few pleasantries. Sun Lan could not help but say, "Even if you want to be modest, wait until you enter the main tent. You'll probably have to drink a few bowls of ginger soup." After he finished speaking, Qiguan Rang and Sun Lan entered the commander's tent with smiles. He was chased out by Jiang Pengji not long after he entered. "There's nothing urgent right now. You should at least change into a clean set of clothes first. Aren't you afraid of being rude?" Jiang Pengji sent them out to change their clothes. She then asked the soldiers to cook a big pot of ginger soup to ward off the cold. The heavy rain came quickly. Many people were completely drenched before they could react. Jiang Pengji waited for a while before the marshal's tent was slowly filled with people. As the defending party, the casualties on Jiang Pengji's side were not small, and the losses were even greater. After all, arrows could be recycled. When cleaning up the battlefield, not only did they have to clean up the corpses, but they also had to recycle the arrows. Otherwise, based on the scale of 100,000 people, who knew how many arrows would be used to fight a battle? Who could afford to waste so many arrows? If one side won, not only would they be able to retrieve their own arrows, but they would also be able to retrieve the enemy's arrows and increase their military resources. If Niao Yang retreated obediently, Jiang Pengji could send people out of the city to clean up the battlefield and recover the usable resources. In the end, Niao Yang burned everything down with a big fire. He admitted his loss, but Jiang Pengji's loss could not be recovered. All in all, she suffered a great loss in this defensive battle. If it was not for the rain that struck the enemy's morale and public opinion, she would be even more depressed. Jiang Pengji was depressed, but Niao Yang was so angry that he vomited blood. The Nia army retreated and left, returning to the camp in a grandiose manner. Not long after they arrived at the camp, Niao Yang's son, Nia Qing, led a group of officials who had stayed behind to welcome Niao Yang. Niao Yang had just dismounted from the horse's back when he suddenly felt something cold on the back of his hand. What was this feeling? Not long after, another drop of water dripped on the back of his hand. He then knew that it was not an illusion. Looking at the drop of water, Niel Yang's heart tightened. His face was as pale as a wall that had been painted white. "Father, what's wrong?" Nie Qing stood on the right to support Niel Yang, while Wei Dan stood on the left to take care of him. "This is rain?" Wei Dan raised his hand and a few drops of rain fell on his palm. His phoenix eyes gradually widened, and his eyes were filled with shock and disbelief. Nie Qing did not understand. He felt for a while and said, "It's indeed raining. It's normal to rain at this time of year." He found that after he finished speaking, his father Niel Yang's arm was stiff, as though he was forcefully holding on to something. "Father?" Nie Qing asked. Niel Yang's expression turned livid. Caught off guard, he spat out a large mouthful of blood and his body fell backwards. Nie Qing was so shocked by this turn of events that he did not know how to react. It was Wei Dan who went forward to catch Niel Yang and quickly helped him up. "Quick!" Wei Dan was so frightened that cold sweat broke out on his forehead. His refined voice cracked and was filled with panic. "Quick, call the doctor." Many of Niel Yang's confidants knew that his body was not well, and a small number of people had also seen some clues. However, he was extremely calm in front of others. This was the first time he had spat out blood and fainted in front of others. It would not take long for the news to spread throughout the camp. Niel Yang was furious this time. Even a normal person would be injured, let alone a patient like him. The doctor had used all his strength to save him and had even used strong medicine to keep him alive. Seeing this, everyone broke out in a cold sweat for him. "Do your best and leave it to the heavens. If he does not wake up tomorrow, I'm afraid." The white-haired and bearded doctor shook his head and sighed heavily. Everyone's hearts sank when they saw this. After this torment, it was already late at night. The heavy rain had finally stopped, and the puddles on the ground were filled with rainwater. Nie Qing took care of the seriously ill Niel Yang, his eyes bloodshot. Nie Yang frowned when he saw this. He said sincerely, "Elder brother, uncle will definitely be able to turn this into safety." Nie Qing knelt by Niel Yang's bed, his face full of self-blame. He had learned of the situation at the front lines from the generals who had participated in the battle and understood why his father had spat out blood after the rain. The heavens were on the enemy's side. A heavy rain had ruined Niel Yang's plans. How could he not be furious and spit out blood? Nie Yang said, "This matter is clearly Lu Shi's fault. Elder brother, why do you blame yourself? If uncle knew, he would definitely be displeased and scold you. How could a man be so indecisive?" Niel Yang vomiting blood, in the end it had nothing to do with Nie Qing. What was he blaming himself for? Nie Qing said, "Would rather father wake up and scold me, or ask for the family rules, than watch him struggle on the line between life and death." Nie Yang did not say anything else. He only stayed by Nie Qing's side silently. The system's cold sarcasm entered his ears. "Nie Qing must be extremely touched by you right now, it's a pity. Who would know that you were the main culprit who harmed Niel Yang?" Nie Yang did not show it on his face, but he laughed coldly in his heart. "Shut up. Why would the system listen?" Ever since it ruthlessly punished Nie Yang, their roles had been swapped. Chapter 1485. The matter of Niel Yang vomiting blood and fainting was suppressed by Wei Yong. Any soldier who dared to talk about it in private would be punished. After a series of harsh measures, the unstable morale of the army temporarily calmed down, but everyone knew that it was only temporary. There were 70,000 soldiers who participated in the battle during the day. These people had witnessed how the fire at Zhangjiang Pass started and knew how the fire was extinguished. Even God did not give them face and stood on the enemy's side. They were very flustered and worried about their future. Fighting with people was endless joy, but wasn't fighting with God courting death? That night, many people were so worried that they could not sleep well. Niao also woke up in the early morning. He clearly felt that his body was much heavier than before, and he had no strength in his entire body. As soon as he turned his head, he saw his tired son lying on the side of the bed. Another person called Niao was also lying on the side and sleeping soundly. "My lord is awake?" Wei Yong noticed that his lord was awake immediately, and his anxious mood instantly calmed down. Niao used his eyes to signal Wei Yong to speak softly so as not to wake Niaqing. He closed his eyes and thought about the reason for his coma. He sighed and asked, "What was the situation after I fainted?" Wei Yong said, "There was no movement on Lu Shi's side. Some soldiers in the camp spread rumors and dealt with it immediately. The morale of the army could not be shaken. Once it was shaken, the war would not be easy to fight." Niao said weakly, "Despite all the calculations, I didn't expect God to be on her side. She calculated the hearts of men, but she lacked a trace of God's will. After all, he was an ancient person. He did not know that the fire would heat up the air on the ground and cause it to expand and rise. He also did not know that the air above would contract and sink. The two would cause the water vapor in the air to condense into clouds and mist. Recently, the weather was about to rain. Niao fire only brought the rain forward. Not knowing this, Niao would naturally attribute this coincidental rain to God's will like the others. Wei Yong said, "My lord, why do you say such depressing words? So what if it's God's will? Everything depends on human effort." Niao smiled weakly. "You're right." He had never been a person who believed in fate, but this coincidence made him crazy. "My lord, please rest for a while. I will call the doctor over now." Niang was shrouded in a layer of haze, but Jiang Pengji, who was his opponent, could not cheer up. On the contrary, she flipped over the bronze table in anger. Bai Ning immediately stepped forward to plead for leniency. "My lord, please calm your anger. This general thinks that there are many suspicious points in this matter. We might as well return and continue the interrogation." He had no choice but to stand up. His daughter, Bai Yuexia, was also involved in the leak of the carpentry workshop secrets. He had never seen his lord so angry before. He was so scared that his liver trembled. Jiang Pengji suppressed her anger and did not continue tormenting the bronze table. Perhaps she would not have the chance to do so in the future. Why? The bronze table covered with his lord's handprints was bent in her rage. Aside from Bai Ning, there were also others who stood up to plead for Zhang Ping, Xiao Guang, and the others. Jiang Pengji's anger was too terrifying. They were really worried that their lord would order the execution of the three of them in a fit of anger. Why did he want to kill them? Because many of the carpentry workshop secrets were leaked, Zhang Ping and the other two were implicated. Old man Sun Wen wanted to say a few words to persuade Jiang Pengji to punish them lightly and spare their lives. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that Wei Ci was as still as a mountain. He could not help but frown. Zhang Ping and Wei Ci were close friends. The former was in trouble, but the latter did not say anything. Either Wei Ci was clean and gave up on his friend Zhang Ping, refusing to plead for him and sully himself, or Wei Ci was confident that nothing would happen to Zhang Ping and the others. Sun Wen glanced at Qiguan Rang again and found that he was also as calm as Mount Tai. He held his newly made feather fan and closed his eyes in deep thought. Well, it looked like it was the latter. That was the truth. Although Jiang Pengji was angry, she did not plan to do anything to Zhang Ping and the others, let alone order their execution. She calmed her anger and glanced at the messenger. She said, "Tell me everything in detail." The matter was simple. Because of Zhang Ping and the others' negligence, a spy had infiltrated the carpentry workshop. The spy had a photographic memory and had quietly stolen several confidential drawings from the carpentry workshop. For several years, no clues had been found. It was only recently that a flaw was revealed. The spy was ready to slip away. He found an excuse that his mother was sick and asked Zhang Ping for a 7-day leave to visit his family. However, the spy did not return after 7 days. Zhang Ping was worried and sent someone to check the spy's address. Only then did he find that the house was empty. If that was the case, he would at most be suspicious. However, Zhang Ping found a fragment of old and yellowed rice paper in a bird's nest near the house. Although the fragment was only a small corner, Zhang Ping could still recognize that it was part of the design of a new crossbow that had been developed a while ago. He immediately became suspicious and ordered people to search everywhere. Finally, they found a few relatively complete drawings in the house of a sluggard nearby. The sluggard said, when that Mr. packed his things and left, he threw a pile of paper into the charcoal basin. I secretly stole some of them and hid them in my house. There are even words on them. When my son grows up, he can learn a word or two. Sir, I'm really not a thief. Zhang Ping felt dizzy when he heard this. The carpentry workshop had strict rules. No drawings could be taken out, and the confidential contents would be backed up and hidden in a secret storeroom. The storeroom had 3 locks, and only he, Xiao Guang, and Bai Yuexia could open it with the keys. The storeroom was heavily guarded, and there hadn't been any unusual movements recently. The only explanation was that the spy had secretly recorded the drawings and made a copy when he came back. Zhang Ping realized that the situation wasn't good and immediately reported this matter to Su Ku, Feng Jin, and the others. On one hand, they sent troops to kill the spy, and on the other, they carefully investigated the truth of the matter. This spy was a member of the Mo family who had sought refuge with Zhang Ping many years ago. Because Zhang Ping disliked his ability, he had never been put in an important position. Later, the spy was transferred to Xiao Guang's side. Xiao Guang had a good temper and would occasionally give the spy some work. The real reason this spy was promoted was because of Bai Yuexia. Bai Yuexia had discovered that the spy had a photographic memory. Although this person's talent was weak and his creative ability was lacking, he was honest, loyal, and willing to endure hardships. After a few years of experience, he slowly climbed up. After accumulating enough experience, Bai Yuexia would occasionally guide him, and the spy once again entered the eyes of Zhang Ping and Xiao Guang. For the past year, the spy had participated in the remodeling design and was qualified to access the confidential drawings, so he secretly made a copy. Because Zhang Ping and the others would update the drawings at any time and make changes to the details, the spy had quite a few copies. He took the final version of the draft and burned the rest, but he didn't expect a nearby sluggard to intercept a part of it. Jiang Pengji continued to ask about the spy, such as his name, background, and ancestral home. On the other side, Wei Si's brows furrowed more tightly as he listened. He had never thought that the spy would be this person. Shi Zhong, an ordinary name, was a typical example of a person who was unknown throughout his life. However, he had an extraordinary and extremely famous wife, Bai Yuexia. Yes, in her previous life, Bai Yuexia's husband was Shi Zhong. Chapter 1486. May fall in love with you. Oh no, the streamer hates betrayal the most, not to mention betraying her with a bunch of confidential drawings. Zienkyo, TSK. How is this betrayal? She has a boss, so she's a spy. If she doesn't care about her boss but works hard for the streamer instead, that's abnormal, isn't it? However, this operation is indeed disgusting. Although the salted fish were always complaining about Jiang Pengji's bad luck, if she really encountered something that didn't go her way, the salted fish were even more furious than she was. The streamer in front of them is their 5 million salted fish coach. No one can bully her except them. Tangled Pegasus, sigh, am I the only one worried about Zhang Ping and the other two? Although this was done by a spy, they are also responsible for their negligence. The missing drawings are most likely a military secret. These charges are probably not easy to get away with. Because Zhang Ping and the others were technical geeks and engineering students, they rarely appeared in front of Jiang Pengji, and the salted fish rarely saw them. Even so, the salted fish still quite liked the three, and there were also spontaneously organized fan groups among the people. Zhang Ping and the others made a big mistake, and the salted fish could not help but feel worried for them. When Bai Ning and the others pleaded for mercy, some salted fish also echoed and pleaded for mercy. Some salted fish even suggested crowdfunding to reduce the punishment. However, a few salted fish bosses saw it clearly. Not to that extent. The charge of inadequate supervision can be serious or minor. It all depends on the streamer's choice. Zhang Ping and the others did not collude with the spy, and the streamer has been vigorously supporting technological research and development. She will most likely be lenient. While the salted fish argued endlessly, Jiang Pengji also made a statement. She fined Zhang Ping and the others a year's salary. It was a small punishment but a big warning. At the same time, she asked the three to reflect on their actions and settle the score when they returned. For three highly paid personnel, this little punishment was really just a drizzle. Bai Ning secretly heaved a sigh of relief and stopped pleading for his daughter, lest it backfire and make the Lord hate him. He changed the topic at the right time and turned his gaze to the spy named Shizhong. He must catch him and punish him. Jiang Pengji said expressionlessly, "How can it be so easy to catch him and punish him? We still don't know who Shizhong is working for." Even though Feng Jin, Su Ku, and the others had immediately sent troops to capture them, they were too late. The golden period had long passed. Because there was no progress in the pursuit, they could only quickly order the various checkpoints to pay attention to suspicious people. They would rather catch 1,000 wrongly than let one go. When Shizhong's news reached Jiang Pengji, there was no news of the spy anywhere. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. Everyone could only speculate which faction Shizhong belonged to based on the clues left behind. Shizhong's case was very serious, but Jiang Pengji was at the front line. She had no extra energy to look for a needle in a haystack. After discussing for a while, everyone dispersed. Wei Ci took a stroll outside and returned. Jiang Pengji said, "Aren't you burying your head in the sand? Apart from a few people with bad eyesight and a few people with no brains, who doesn't know that you and I have been in cahoots for a long time? If you go out for a spin and come back, it will give people the feeling that you're hiding something and make them suspicious." When Wei Ci heard the words hooking up and committing adultery, he immediately felt that his lord needed to take up some cultural lessons. "I know that person called Shizhong." Wei Ci coughed softly and briefly explained the reason for his visit. "What? You know him? Why didn't you say it just now?" Jiang Pengji knew the reason after thinking for a while. "It's inconvenient to say." Wei Ci knew him, but it was inconvenient to say it. The only explanation was that he knew Shizhong in his previous life. It's indeed inconvenient. Although we don't have any interaction in this life, we met a few times in our previous life. I know a little. In this life, Wei Ci and Shizhong did not have any interaction at all. He could not possibly use the excuse of calculating with his fingers and observing the sky at night to fool people. He continued, "Shizhong's ancestral home is in Zhongzhou Maozhou. Because of his inelegant appearance and short stature, he was rejected to become an official. In this era, one could not become an official just by having talent and background. It also depended on one's height, appearance, physical disability, and skin that was exposed. In short, if one did not look good, he would not be qualified to become an official. He could only be an ordinary person for the rest of his life. Even if there were other ways to become an official, he would most likely not be put in an important position. He would be mediocre for the rest of his life and would not be able to stand out. Yes, the world that valued appearance was that cruel. As a member of the club that did not meet the standards for looks, Shizhong's experience was naturally bumpy. He first sought refuge with the local gentry family in Maozhou as a guest. Because he was ugly and had no ability, he sat on the bench for a year. They did not want to keep a freeloader, so they tactfully chased him away. Shizhong could only look for another family. Finally, under the recommendation of a friend, he entered the Wei family in Bianzhou and became a guest. The Wei family in Bianzhou? Isn't that the birthplace of your ancestral home? Wei Ci nodded and replied, my ancestor was indeed a branch of the Wei family in Bianzhou and finally settled in Lange County. However, the branch in Lange County moved back to Bianzhou 10 years ago in order to protect the descendants of the family. This is also a way out. In her previous life, Wei Ci followed them to Zhongzhou at that time. In this life, he rejected it and stayed in Lange County with a few servants. Jiang Pengji nodded and did not interrupt. Wei Ci continued, the Wei family in Bianzhou have many handsome men. With Shi Zhong's looks and talents, he became a guest under the Wei family. One can imagine his situation. Jiang Pengji looked at Wei Ci's face. She deeply agreed with the phrase, the Wei family has many handsome men. In that case, the person who sent him to be a spy is very likely to be your elder brother? Jiang Pengji remembered that the Wei family was considered a first-class gentry family in Bianzhou. A few years ago, the Wei family's status was not as high as it was now. They had no right to order the Wei family's guest to be a spy. After thinking about it, she found a possibility. Shi Zhong was sent by Wei Qiong. My lord's guess coincides with mine, Wei Ci said. In fact, Shi Zhong was one of my elder brother's men in my previous life. Of course, Shi Zhong did not have the opportunity to be a spy in his previous life. When their emperor attacked Zhongzhou, Nieliang had already knelt down. His elder brother Wei Qiong had been depressed for many years and passed away before he was 50. What abilities does Shi Zhong have? Wei Ci smiled and said, he doesn't have many abilities. He just has a good memory, good handwriting, and looks honest on the outside. My elder brother in my previous life took a fancy to this. That's why he let Shi Zhong stay by his side to help organize the documents. Occasionally, he would write and correct some chores. Shi Zhong has never stood out in his life. His mother has a stubborn personality. She chased away a few daughters-in-law and insisted that her son marry a good one. Jiang Pengji frowned. Who did Shi Zhong marry in the end? Wei Ci said, General Bai Ning's only daughter, Bai Yuexia. How can that be? I don't have much contact with Bai Yuexia, but I know that she has a strong temperament. How could she fall for such a person? Chapter 1487. Wei Ci also smiled bitterly. Regarding this point, he vaguely heard the reason from Her Majesty. There were no more than 3 reasons why Bai Yuexia chose Shi Zhong. First, Shi Zhong knew how to please his father-in-law and increase Bai Ning's favorability. Second, Bai Yuexia also felt that she should have a child to continue the bloodline and let her father, Bai Ning, feel more at ease in his old age. Third, Shi Zhong was a man with no ability and was easy to bully. No matter how much he roared or barked, he was still the same. When all men are men, there is only one father. What the ancient said makes some sense. In summary, Bai Yuexia was willing to end her single life only for her old father, Bai Ning. There were many men in the world who could be a husband, but there was only one father. How could the two be compared? It was not appropriate for him to say these details, so he just vaguely explained the general situation. He said, Bai Yuexia was almost 30 in her previous life, but she still refused to get married. General Bai Ning was very worried. Shi Zhong was forced by his mother, and somehow, he set his eyes on her, hoping that Bai Yuexia could help him in his career. Shi Zhong was self-aware and did not take the initiative to approach the girl. Instead, he took a detour to look for General Bai Ning. After a while, he had a good impression of her. Shi Zhong pretended to be good before marriage, but after a few years of marriage, he revealed his true nature. He could not tolerate his wife being in a high position and humiliating his dignity as a husband. Jiang Pengji laughed. That's funny. On one hand, he wants his wife to help him, but on the other hand, he can't tolerate his wife being in a higher position than him. What does that mean? Does he think that if Bai Yuexia helped him and gave him a chance, he would be able to rise to the top? Doesn't he have any idea what kind of qualifications he has? Wei Ci said, there are many people in this world who are more ambitious than the sky. Maybe that's what he thinks. In the end, Bai Yuexia and Shi Zhong were married for a few years and had 2 children. Shi Zhong was still a small official who could not be put in an important position, but Bai Yuexia's career became smoother and smoother. She became the Minister of Works, one of the 6 ministries. Everyone in the imperial court knew that Bai Yuexia had a good-for-nothing husband. When his colleagues gathered together, there were always people who teased or ridiculed Shi Zhong, asking him why, as the head of the family, he couldn't control his wife. Shi Zhong had long held a grudge against Bai Yuexia for not doing her best to support him. Now, he was even more furious and jealous. He did not know when it started, but Shi Zhong started to wander around the red light district. The first time he went there, his colleague informed Bai Yuexia. Bai Yuexia waited for him to return to the mansion and interrogate him. Shi Zhong knew his colleague's secret and was ashamed and angry. He lost his composure and wanted to use domestic violence. As the daughter of a general, how could Bai Yuexia be at a disadvantage? On the contrary, it was Shi Zhong who was beaten black and blue by her, crying and wailing. After learning the whole story of her son's beating, Shi Zhong's mother secretly urged Bai Yuexia to resign from her position and stay at home to serve her husband and teach her son. Shi Zhong's mother pushed and fought, and Bai Yuexia had a miscarriage. She didn't know she was pregnant until she miscarried. Jiang Pengji said, in this world, other than blood-related men and married men, what man can't be a husband? She can actually tolerate it? Wei Ci said, of course she didn't. Coincidentally, Her Majesty was implementing the one family, 2 household system. She used her official position to force Shi Zhong to agree. She originally wanted to register both children into her family and then prepare for a divorce. However, Shi Zhong and his mother refused to agree, and the law did not support Bai Yuexia's taking the 2 children, so she took her eldest daughter away. This daughter is very promising, but that son was raised to be useless. Bai Yuexia's eldest daughter was chosen to be the study companion of the crown prince, Jiang Yan. Looking at the relationship between the 2 children, they would definitely be the left and right arms of the young emperor in the future. Bai Yuexia's son was raised to be arrogant and willful by Shi Zhong and his mother. After Shi Zhong remarried, his wife maliciously praised him to death. When the child was 15 years old, he fought with others and rode a horse to race. He trampled 6 people to death and was finally sentenced to death. Jiang Pengji was not surprised. Shi Zhong and his mother are not good. How can they teach their child well under the influence of what they see and hear? Wei Ci said, that child, I'm afraid his innate talent is not good. He takes after his father. Before Bai Yuexia divorced, she was the one who raised the child. Not long after the divorce, Bai Yuexia found out about her son's situation in the residence. She wanted to raise him, but unexpectedly, the child pointed his finger at his biological mother and insulted her, comparing her to a prostitute. Bai Yuexia was so angry that she completely gave up on this son and refused to acknowledge him anymore. Of course, in the end, she was the one who sent people to the market to collect her son's corpse. Their mother-son relationship was limited to that. Shi Zhong is really a bad person. After he separated from Bai Yuexia, he often referred to himself as the husband of the Minister of Works. Usually, he would drink with his scoundrels and gossip about Bai Yuexia's private affairs. He often visited brothels and his mother slandered and insulted him everywhere. Officials were very concerned about their reputation. No matter what happened internally, their reputation must not be tainted on the surface. If Bai Yuexia was not trusted by Her Majesty and she was usually cautious and reliable, she would probably be depressed by the imperial censor's criticism. Wei Ci said, I thought that Bai Yuexia had long entered the Lord's tent and she would not meet Shi Zhong. I didn't expect to meet him in this way. Jiang Pengji said, maybe this is called fate. Even if it's fate, it's an ill-fated relationship. Wei Ci sighed. Compared to Shi Zhong, I think Shiheng is better. It's a pity that Shiheng has worked with her for several years, but they still address each other as colleagues. There doesn't seem to be any romantic feelings between them. If the two of them can get married, it will be perfect. Zhang Ping was fated to have a plum wife and a crane son in his previous life. This was also his pursuit, so Wei Ci could not persuade him otherwise. In this life, he saw that Zhang Ping's obsession with being single for the rest of his life was not very deep. Perhaps there was a chance. Jiang Pengji said, "If you were an iceman, I'm afraid you would starve to death." Wei Ci asked, "Why?" Jiang Pengji said, "Matchmaking is also a skill. How can I mess around like you?" Wei Ci held back his laughter and said, "I hope that my lord can point out the right path." Jiang Pengji said as if she had been through it, "To deal with this kind of situation, you should get straight to the point. Don't pretend to be ambiguous. Ask them what their impression of each other is and whether they are willing to lie in the same coffin after 100 years. Won't that solve the problem?" Wei Ci was speechless. Wasn't this too simple and crude? I'll go back and try. Maybe I can be a matchmaker. I haven't been to a wedding for a long time. Jiang Pengji hesitated for a while and said, "Wait, why do you want to matchmake Shiheng and Yuexia, and not someone else?" It's not that I'm biased, but Shiheng has a dignified appearance. If he has the intention to get married, I'm afraid that his family's doorstep will be flattened by icemen. The possibility of him choosing Yuexia doesn't seem high. Wei Ci held back his laughter and said, "Shiheng doesn't rely on a face to distinguish beauty from ugliness, he relies on his hands." Because of this strange illness, others thought that Zhang Ping was arrogant and difficult to get along with. Wei Ci was one of the few friends he had. He took the initiative to get to know Wei Ci only because he had a pair of hands that made people fall in love at first sight. Chapter 1488. So he's face blind. Based on his situation, it's indeed difficult for him to find someone he likes. After all, no one knew what kind of hands Zhang Ping liked. No matter how good-looking Wei Ci's hands were, they belonged to someone. They couldn't give them away. Wei Ci said, "My lord, why don't you send someone to guard the mountains near Zhangjiang Pass? Maybe there will be some gains." Since Shi Zhong was sent by Wei Ci's elder brother, Wei Dan, he would definitely find a way to hand the things over to Wei Dan after stealing the secrets. At this time, Wei Dan was in the Nya camp outside the pass. Shi Zhong would definitely not go far. He would most likely cross the border nearby and sneak in. Jiang Pengji nodded. "I understand. Later, send someone to guard and arrest any suspicious people." Since the end of the siege, the troops of the two armies had not moved. Nieliang needed to recuperate, and Jiang Pengji needed to reorganize the troops. She counted with her fingers. The supplies sent by the logistics were almost here. Time passed in a flash. The new episode of Dream of 1,000 Years began the lucky draw. The 5 million salted fish rubbed their hands excitedly. "Yen Rian, make another wish. I'm willing to exchange 15 pounds of meat for a dream of 1,000 years! Tong Meng, I also make a wish. I'm willing to exchange Tang Qi for a dream of 1,000 years! Fu Duo, choose me, choose me. I woke up early today to go to Jinshan Temple to pray. I'm very devout." Looking at the screen full of prayers and metaphysics, Jiang Pengji sighed and pressed the lucky draw button. Countless salted fish IDs flashed in the center of the screen. After a minute, there was a beep. The lucky emperor was born. Lan Shui Yubuja, me. It's actually me. I'm so lucky. Goodbye, I'm going to cross over. The lucky emperor was so excited that he was incoherent. The other salted fish felt sour in their hearts and roared angrily, "Bah!" Because of the previous lucky emperor's strategy posts, the salted fish were seriously prepared, regardless of whether they were lucky enough to cross over. Maybe one day they would be lucky enough to cross over. The new lucky emperor happily ran to her Simon's bed. She did not take off her clothes or shoes. She lay flat on the bed and closed her eyes. Not long after, she felt a sense of weightlessness, as if she had flown into the sky. When she opened her eyes, the scenery around her had changed greatly. She was not lying on a spring mattress, but wild grass and gravel. No way, so unlucky, a slightly deep male voice escaped from his throat, scaring her into covering her mouth. After a while, she carefully moved her other hand down to his Adam's apple, and then down to his flat chest. She continued to move down, and her face turned red as she let go of her hand. Oh my, not only did he come to the wilderness, he even turned into a man. In her era, the number of humans had skyrocketed, squeezing too much living space. Snakes had no habitat, so it was a problem for them to reproduce and survive. It was different in ancient times. The number of humans was small, and there were many habitats in the wild. Snakes could restrain humans, so the density was naturally high. Careful to avoid dangerous creatures, she climbed down the mountain, stumbling. She didn't know if the man climbed over the mountain and wanted to go down, or if he had just climbed a few dozen meters. Anyway, she refused to stay in the forest with wild beasts. After spending more than an hour, she finally went down the mountain. Oh my, there's smoke over there. It's almost noon. She could vaguely see smoke rising from the horizon, and she could vaguely see the outline of some buildings. Her heart was moved. She opened her arms and hugged the sky. She felt better than ever. Jiang Pengji was speechless. Wait a minute, the environment that this lucky emperor was in seemed a little familiar. At that moment, Jiang Pengji felt that the camp was boring. She randomly found an excuse to patrol the camp, and the two of them took a walk on horseback. Of course, to ensure safety, there were hundreds of guards following behind them. While they were chatting, they paid attention to the European emperor in the streaming room, in case the child was stopped by the poisonous snakes. Little Erlang, carry your school bag to school. The European emperor hummed a nursery rhyme and found a white horse and a red dress reflected on the stream not far away. Because this body was short-sighted, she couldn't see very clearly. Who is it? Accompanied by the pleasant and somewhat familiar male voice, she heard the sound of a sharp sword being unsheathed. She panicked. In the blink of an eye, the sharp sword in Wei Si's hand was already against her neck. C.I. Beauty C.I. Oh my, she won the lottery. Chapter 1489. Beauty C.I. Wei C.I. did not know if she was referring to him, but just the word beauty was enough to make him angry. No matter how well-mannered Wei C.I. was, he could not hold it in any longer. He angrily rebuked, "Lecher. De lecher?" The salted fish lucky king could not help but exclaim, even scolding people sounds so nice. Jiang Pengji knew very well that even though she said that Wei Si's martial arts skills were at the level of a small class of square dancers, it was not a problem for him to deal with an empty-handed salted fish who was obsessed with beauty. If salted fish was allowed to do as he pleased, Wei Si might not be able to hold back and stab someone to death. Zixiao, what's wrong? Jiang Pengji clamped the horse's abdomen and walked forward leisurely. White snorted and did as she said. It looked extremely docile. Hearing these words, the salted fish lucky king could not help but look at the newcomer. Because she was short-sighted, she couldn't see clearly at first. She only saw a red shadow on a white horse approaching her. When the other party arrived in front of her, 4 words suddenly popped up in her mind. Fresh clothes and furious horses. The woman on the back of the horse was dressed in red, and there was a faint smile on her handsome face. The white horse she was riding on was snow white from head to toe, and there was not a single flaw on it. The salted fish European king stood rooted to the ground. He stared at the screen for a long time, and his brain froze for a moment. Unbeknownst to him, the live stream was already bursting at the seams. Countless unlucky people were wailing in anguish, passionately portraying what it meant to be envious, jealous, and hateful. Tudu Faccio, this is a historic moment. I never thought that salted fish would have the chance to be in the same frame as the host. Yi Wu Yenling, I'm so jealous. Why is it that when I transmigrated, I was so far away from the host, but when she transmigrated, she had the opportunity to meet the host couple? It was heartbreaking enough to see the guy who ate by rubbing his feet, but he didn't expect this guy to be the real deal. Gui Kai Gua Feng Shao, did you guys notice that each time I transmigrated, the luckier one by one? Does this mean that the next time I transmigrate, I will have the chance to collect all the illustrated achievements, get the signatures of all the members, and walk to the peak of life with antiques in my pocket? Kojiao Chi Fan, wash up and go to sleep. Everything is possible in daydreams. While the salted fishes were boiling with excitement, the target of their envy was facing a test of life and death. Wei Si's hand that was holding the sword was very steady. The salted fish lucky queen did not dare to move, for fear that the other party's hand would slip and stab her. Big brother, let's sit down and talk. Don't play around with weapons. That's not in line with the core values of socialism. The salted fish lucky emperor knew his place. He knew that his address just now had offended Wei Si, so he could only change the way he addressed Wei Si with tears in his eyes. Wei Si did not listen to her explanation and answered Jiang Pengji's question. My lord, this person's behavior is impetuous, his words are frivolous, and his actions are also suspicious. Why don't we bring him down for interrogation? The salted fish lucky king could not help but shed 2 streams of tears. I've been a fan of you for so many years. As my idol, you actually treat your fans like this. Sad QAQ Jiang Pengji dismounted from the horse and resisted the urge to smile. Forget it. He looks like a hunter who lives a hard life. Put away your sword first. Look, he's so scared that he's about to cry. Wei Si did as he was told and skillfully sheathed the snow-white sword. When the salted fish lucky queen saw this, she secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. She decided to take back her label of Wei Si as a weakling. Who are you? Jiang Pengji asked with a pleasant expression. The salted fish lucky queen's eyes darted around. When she saw the system's notification, she secretly heaved a sigh of relief. I'm a hunter from the nearby mountains. Greetings, my lord. She stuttered as she spoke. Her posture of cupping her fists was also very awkward. Instead, she portrayed the image of a hunter who had not seen the world. Wei Si glanced at the books and luggage that she was carrying and said indifferently, a bunch of nonsense. This person's image was quite in line with the image of a hunter, but the things that he was carrying were not what a hunter should have. The salted fish lucky queen looked at Wei Si with a wronged expression. She was answering according to the system's notification. Could it be that the system was making fun of her? Wei Si asked, you said that you're a hunter. Then whose things do you have on you belong to? When the salted fish lucky queen heard Wei Si's question, she suddenly had the illusion that her heart was beating 70 beats per minute. If Jiang Pengji was not by her side, she really wanted to pounce on Wei Si and hug him. Even if she would be stabbed a few times by the other party, it would be worth it. Even if she died under a peony flower, she would still be a romantic ghost. I have these things. The salted fish lucky queen could not help but glance at the system's notification. After she saw it clearly, she almost cursed out loud. At the same time, she blamed herself for being careless. Why? Because the luggage did not belong to this body at all. I picked up these luggage. The salted fish lucky queen stuttered. Her entire face looked even more aggrieved and pitiful, as if she was about to cry in the next second. I really picked them up. I saw that the luggage was on the ground and no one wanted it, so I took it. However, Wei Si said, picked up. There were not many households near Zhangjiang Pass. After the war started, the evacuation of the people was hastened. Now that it's in the wilderness, where did you pick up these things? Could it be that the nearby bandits were tempted by the wealth and killed to steal it? The salted fish Lucky Queen watched as Wei Ci placed his right hand on the hilt of his sword. Her legs turned to jelly. Why did Beauty Ci guess so accurately? Yes, this body was actually a bandit who made a living by robbing people. There were 6 other accomplices. Since the war started at Zhangjiang Pass, the 6 accomplices were afraid of Jiang Pengji's power and influence. They secretly moved to another place. Only this body could not leave because it had to take care of its elderly mother. Because there were no passers-by, the bandit had a hard time. He did not make any business for a few days. Yesterday, he met a sloppy refugee. He followed him with a hatchet in his hand. It happened to be raining heavily. The bandit and the refugee were fighting. He thought that he could kill the person in a few moves. He did not expect the other party to be so stubborn that he would rather die than let go. In desperation, the bandit chopped randomly with the hatchet a few times. The heavy rain quickly calmed his feverish mind. He realized that it was very likely that he had killed someone. He was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. He turned to escape. The mountain road was rugged and it was raining heavily. The bandit lost his footing and rolled down the mountain. When he woke up the next day, he had already become the salted fish Lucky Queen. The system gave a brief introduction, but the salted fish Lucky Queen only saw that the body was that of a bandit. She killed someone. Wei Ci used a sword to scare her. She shivered and confessed everything. Wei Ci's face was livid. Jiang Pengji, who was standing 2 steps away from him, secretly face-bombed. She was sure that the salted fish Lucky Queen was a good girl. She would confess whatever Wei Ci lied to her. In a more complicated environment, she would not survive more than 2 episodes. Jiang Pengji even covered up for her and said that she was a hunter who lived nearby. So, you really killed someone to steal their wealth? Wei Ci's left thumb pushed against the sword's guard. The snow-white blade was slightly unsheathed. Chapter 1490. She thought she was lucky enough to meet 2 of her idols. She didn't expect Wei Ci, one of her idols, to want to kill her. Was she going to be the first unlucky person to die in the hands of her idols in the history of Dream of 1,000 Years? The more she thought about it, the sadder she felt. The more she thought about it, the more she wanted to cry. At the critical moment when her life was threatened, she cried herself hoarse. Wei Ci was speechless. This bandit was not tall, but his muscles were solid. He belonged to the short and capable type, and he had a ferocious appearance. He didn't expect that the honorable person, who could cure children's cries at night, would have a cowardly and weak heart. He only said a few words, and the other party actually cried. No matter how bad Jiang Pengji's temperament was, she would not deliberately humiliate someone who treated her sincerely. The lucky guy in front of her was even her fan. Zixiao, why don't you send someone to investigate the things he robbed? Even though he is a robber who has done many evil things, his filial piety is commendable. The law is nothing more than human feelings. If you really want to punish him, you have to let him settle down his old mother at home first. We can't let the old lady lose her son and have no one to take care of her. Jiang Pengji's voice was like the sound of heaven to the salted fish lucky guy's ears. What do you think? Wei Ci took 2 steps back and bowed. It's all up to you, my lord. The salted fish lucky guy heaved a sigh of relief. His eyes were as red as a rabbit's, inexplicably weakening his fierce temperament. Jiang Pengji said, I'll keep an eye on him. Zixiao, go and investigate. Let me know the results. Wei Ci disagreed. This person is a robber after all. What he does is murder and robbery. How can my lord be with him? Jiang Pengji smiled. If he had the ability to hurt me, he wouldn't just be a robber. After Wei Ci walked a few steps away, the salted fish lucky guy's expression instantly brightened. He lowered his voice and said, "Streamer, you're amazing." She thought Wei Ci was a soft and cute scholar. She didn't expect to meet him face to face, only to find out that she was intimidated by Wei Ci's aura. Jiang Pengji said, "You don't have to worry about your safety in the few hours you stay here. It was fine in the past. After all, the salted fish were far away from her. But now she was right under her nose, and they were near the battlefield of the two armies. If he left her to wander outside alone, who knew if she could survive for more than 12 hours? He should at least take care of her a little." It was just a short sentence, but the salted fish European king felt extremely comfortable and safe. "Streamer, you're so nice. You're a good person." Her eyes were red as she said, "If it weren't for Beauty Ci, I would really want to hug you." Jiang Pengji said coldly, "You can't hug me when he's not here." "Why?" "Ugly reject." Salted fish lucky king, ing. While they were talking, Wei Ci walked over in a hurry, seeming to have lost his composure. In his hands were a few pieces of fine silk cloth. "Master, look," Wei Ci handed the cloth to Jiang Pengji. She took it and unfolded it. She frowned slightly. On it was a drawing of the woodworking workshop's top secret. She gestured at salted fish with her peripheral vision and asked Wei Ci, "Shizhong?" Wei Ci shook his head. This person is definitely not Shizhong. He didn't have much interaction with Shizhong in his previous life, but he had met him twice in a hurry. If salted fish European king's body was really Shizhong's, there was no reason that Wei Ci couldn't recognize him the first time they met. In that case, the refugee he robbed last night was Shizhong? Jiang Pengji suddenly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "The possibility of this guess is very high," Wei Ci said calmly. Shizhong didn't have such experience in the past. Zhangjiang Pass is located at the border between the two countries. The atmosphere is chaotic and bandits are everywhere. He avoided detection and tried to cross the mountain. It's hard to guarantee that he won't encounter bandits who block the road and rob him. In the previous life and this life, everyone's fate had changed greatly. Shizhong was still as unlucky as ever. Jiang Pengji said, "Send someone to search the mountain. I want to see him alive or dead." Regardless of whether Shizhong was truly loyal to her, he had worked under her for a few years. Wasn't it a betrayal to betray his master now? She could tolerate the shortcomings of her subordinates, but she couldn't tolerate her subordinates betraying her. Traitors had to die. "It's best if he's alive. I'll kill him myself." Salted fish European king interrupted and asked her, "What if he's dead?" "Whip the corpse." You have a heavy taste." Wei Ci's face darkened and he scolded, "Don't be rude." Salted fish European king immediately became as quiet as a quail. She didn't even dare to look around. The real Beauty Ci was very different from the gentle gentleman she imagined. She felt pressured. Jiang Pengji heard her ridicule and laughed. "Do you know? This is the difference between the original and my peers." Incisive. Salted fish gave Jiang Pengji a thumbs up. Human nature was complicated. People would show different faces to different people. Wei Ci was no exception. To friends, he was talkative and considerate. To outsiders, he was elegant and dignified. To his lord, he was loyal and devoted. To those who offended his lord, he naturally had a stern and angry side. The Wei Ci in salted fish's mind was based on the Wei Ci she saw in the streaming room. Naturally, it was different from reality. Wei Ci sent someone to search for Shizhong's corpse, but after searching the mountain, they only found a pool of blood and drops of blood scattered intermittently along the way. Shizhong wasn't hacked to death last night. After waking up, he hastily treated his wounds and left. Looking at the time, he's most likely at the Nya camp. Wei Ci said, "When I sent people to search the mountain, the soldiers reported that there were obvious footprints nearby. The number of people was between 15 to 20. This group of people seemed to be looking for something, but they returned home when they couldn't find it. I boldly guessed that this group of people was led here by Shizhong. Most likely so. Jiang Pengji silently calculated the time in her heart and roughly reconstructed the process. The bandits slashed Shizhong randomly and thought that he was dead. In a hurry, they ran and fell down the mountain. In fact, Shizhong only fainted. When Shizhong woke up, he knew that he couldn't snatch the things from the bandits alone. He could only continue to climb the mountain and seek refuge in the Nye camp. Then, he would bring people to look for the bandits. Unexpectedly, the bandits were transmigrated by Lucky King. Lucky King mistakenly thought that the stolen things belonged to the bandits and brought them down the mountain. If Lucky King didn't transmigrate or didn't take the things, these things would have been taken back by Shizhong. This speculation made sense. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "In that case, this bandit did a good deed?" Salted Lucky King rushed to say, "Does this count as me atoning for my crime?" Wei Ci was non-committal. Jiang Pengji took the opportunity to ask, "You can say so. Do you have any wishes?" Salted Lucky King's nerves were tense and she suppressed her wildly beating heart. She had to think carefully about what she wanted. There was only one chance, so she couldn't make a hasty decision. After thinking about it, Salted Lucky King realized that she was also a greedy person. She actually wanted everything. In the end, she asked for everyone's autographs. Jiang Pengji took the initiative to give her a set of fashionable headwear for women. "I saw the bullet screen earlier. You seem to have mentioned that you're getting married soon. This is my gift." Salted Lucky King was stunned on the spot. Her cheeks were fluttering red. Chapter 1491. Thank you. The Lucky Queen suddenly became shy. She felt that it was the best gift she had ever received in her life. It made the wedding meaningful. "I wanted to have a Western-style wedding, but I've changed my mind. How am I supposed to send you the wedding photos?" "I don't think so," Jiang Pengji said frankly. Jiang Pengji said frankly, "However, even if there are no wedding photos, I think you're definitely a very beautiful girl. You'll be the most beautiful bride on your wedding day. Also, I have to apologize to you for what happened to Zixiao. His behavior just now was due to his cautiousness and his protection of me. If he offended you, please don't take it to heart and forgive him." The Salted Lucky Queen blushed. She covered her face with her hands and said shyly, "Actually, it was my fault. I should be the one apologizing to Wei Ci. After all, that title was offensive to him. Nothing has happened yet, and I'm not hurt. Streamer, I realize that you're better than I thought. If not for the fact that you're a girl, I really want to replace the groom." The last sentence was what she wanted to say. The streamer was warm, flirtatious, handsome, beautiful, and responsible. Fortunately, she was a girl. If she was a guy, she would really want to kick her fiancé. I've heard similar words many times before. Jiang Pengji laughed involuntarily. Fortunately, I can fight. Otherwise, I would have been beaten to death by the group. You don't have enough charm, but you still beat your rival in love. Isn't this indirectly admitting that you're inferior to your rival in love? The Salted Lucky Queen shook her head. After a while, she changed the topic. I suddenly thought of something. Others will be jealous of you for giving me such a precious gift. Jiang Pengji glanced at the bullet screen in the streaming room and told the salted fish with a heavy expression. They're making a scene. All of them are envious, jealous, and hateful. Some even plan to send you a knife. The Salted Lucky Queen was very optimistic. This is great. I can open a knife shop without having to purchase goods. Jiang Pengji had a very good impression of the optimistic salted fish. However, because of her identity, she could not pay too much attention to him. Jiang Pengji ordered someone to prepare a delicious meal for the salted fish. She calculated the time and it was time to go back after she finished eating. The food in the army was not very good, but the salted fish European king still finished his meal. He returned to his own world with a set of accessories and gifts from his idols. Jiang Pengji didn't have the energy to care about how salted fish was doing at the moment. How is Shi Zhong's memory? Since he has a photographic memory, even if he doesn't have the blueprint, he should be able to write it down, right? Although they had recovered the blueprint, Shi Zhong had run back to the Nye camp. Leaving this person alive would ultimately be a scourge. You don't have to worry too much about this. Let's not talk about whether or not Shi Zhong can restore the contents of the blueprint. Even if he can, how long will it take to mass-produce them? CI had just sent someone to interrogate the robber, and the robber confessed everything out of fear. He said that he had cut Shi Zhong's hand, cheek, collarbone, and shoulder. With such injuries, even if he didn't die, he would still be half dead. If the injuries were any deeper, it was difficult for him to even hold a brush, so how could he draw a fine picture? Jiang Pengji felt better after hearing that. On second thought, she was suddenly curious about Niel Yang's reaction. Shi Zhong, the chess piece, was completely useless. He went for wool and came home shorn. Even if Shi Zhong wasn't sent by Niel Yang, he was most likely very depressed. Just as Jiang Pengji had guessed, Niel Yang was indeed very depressed at the moment. If he hadn't restrained his temper, he would probably have flown into a rage. Wei Yong said apologetically, "I didn't do my job well. If I had been more cautious and sent someone to receive him earlier, perhaps." Niel Yang interrupted him and sighed in his heart. "Forget it. Even God is helping Lu Shi. What can we do?" Shi Zhong didn't meet anyone who was pursuing him along the way, but he just had to meet a robber when he was crossing the mountain. I have to say, maybe this is fate. When luck was good, everything went smoothly. When luck was bad, even a sip of herbal tea would get stuck in one's teeth. Wei Yong blamed himself incessantly. This matter was his fault. If he had been more cautious and sent someone to receive Shi Zhong, it might have been a different situation. Niel Yang asked again, "How is Shi Zhong's injury now?" He remembered that Zi Shun had said that Shi Zhong had a photographic memory. It didn't matter if the drawing was lost. He could still write it down if he was alive. Wei Yong sighed softly. Not very good. The military doctor said that his right hand was cut by a hatchet. He won't be able to write for a while. The wound on his cheek is too deep. His left eye can't be saved. The wound on his left shoulder has spread to his collarbone. It's not easy to heal and it's very easy to rupture. It had to be said that it was a miracle that Shi Zhong could come back alive. He had the heart but not the strength for other matters. Niel Yang was silent for a long time. However, the two of them didn't know Shi Zhong's determination to climb up. If he couldn't write with his right hand, he would use his left hand. If his left eye was blind, he would only keep his right eye open. If he couldn't move the wound on his shoulder, he would lie down and draw. He had endured humiliation for so many years before he finally got the perfect opportunity to be promoted. How could he give up halfway? In fact, during the years he was undercover in the woodworking workshop, he had thought of defecting. However, the idea didn't last long. After all, the woodworking workshop was a low-level government office. Even if Jiang Pengji attached great importance to it, the people inside almost didn't participate in politics. Zhang Ping, one of the three heads of the woodworking workshop, had worked there for 2 years, but that was because Jiang Pengji was short of talents. Zhang Ping and the others enjoyed excellent treatment, but they didn't have any real power. Or rather, the woodworking workshop was a department that didn't have any power. If Shi Zhong stayed there, no matter how hard he tried, he could only climb to the position of Zhang Ping and the others. Without real power, what was the point of having a high position? However, Shi Zhong was right-handed. He couldn't use his left hand to write. How could he draw exquisite and detailed drawings? He didn't make any progress for a few days. At that moment, Jiang Pengji had finished reorganizing. Several batches of supplies arrived one after another. It's not a solution to always be in a deadlock. We have to find a way to break through, Qiguan Rang said. Niel Yang refused to accept the challenge for several days. This is the fourth time he has put up a no challenge sign. Even though Niel Yang had put up a no challenge sign, Jiang Pengji could still fight if she wanted to. However, they were holed up in the camp. There were more than 200,000 troops in the camp. Jiang Pengji still had to defend Zhangjiang Pass. It was impossible for her to attack with all her might. Therefore, she could only watch helplessly when they put up a no challenge sign. There are only two ways to deal with such a situation. First, find trouble with them. Second, if there's no trouble, then create trouble. Qiguan Rang glanced at his lord from the corner of his eyes. She was the one with the most crooked ideas. Someone suggested, why don't we try to lead the troops to attack at night? Jiang Pengji said, 1,000 people to sneak attack a camp with more than 200,000 troops. If we can't hurt them, we can only let them have a good dream. This idea was too bad. However, let them have a good dream? Niel Yang was now a patient. He probably couldn't stand the torment. Bai Ning said, I have an idea. Jiang Pengji said, tell me about it. Chapter 1492. Bai Ning wasn't the only one who wanted to make a contribution. The 5 million salted fish in the streaming room also wanted to join in. Pulsation activation. Come up with a plan to build up your character and beg for an adventure called Dream of 1,000 Years. I want to be a top scholar. After searching for a long time, I suddenly saw the content of General Tian Dan of Qi setting up the Flaming Bull formation during the Warring States period. I think it's possible. Does the streamer want to get 1,000 bulls to give it a try? Tie a knife to the bull's horns, tie hay to their tails and ignite it, then charge at the enemy's camp. Tout de fait, save it, don't come up with a bad idea. If you want to use this idea to build up your character, I'm afraid you won't have any adventure in your next life. The big boss is a big boss, he has the demeanor of a master when he speaks. Gui Kai Guo Fengxiu, the Flaming Bull formation sounds awesome, but it's actually very unlikely. If I remember correctly, during the Civil War before the founding of the People's Republic, both parties tried the Flaming Bull formation, but it didn't work because the frightened bulls wouldn't charge at the enemy. Tie a knife to a bull's horn. Be careful not to stab your own people. The Flaming Bull formation? It's better to make a bull formation, it's more feasible. After all, animals can't understand human language, and it's impossible for them to obey orders like soldiers. Although there are records of the Flaming Bull formation in history, history can't be completely trusted. The practical difficulty has to be considered. If one plan doesn't work, another plan comes up. Shuli Jiqiu, if the Flaming Bull formation doesn't work, then we can learn from Wife Chow and attack Crow's Nest at night in the classic Battle of Guandu. The streamer sends troops to attack their logistics granary. As long as they burn all their food, the battle will be easy. In Yuajia Zhuga Qinma, hihi, do you know where Niel Yang's logistics granary is? The salted fish are so eager to come up with a plan only because Jiang Pengji's gift to the lucky emperor made them collectively explode. That lucky emperor was extremely lucky. If he had the treatment of a 5 million lottery winner, the other lucky emperors only had $5 at most. It's infuriating to compare. The lucky emperor hasn't held a wedding yet, but he's already released his wedding photos online. He spent a high price to buy custom-made fabric and hired a professional tailor to customize his wedding dress. It's a perfect imitation of Lu Zhao's wedding dress. There are more than 20 pieces of headgear scattered. When he wears all of them and puts on his wedding dress and makeup, everyone is envious. The lucky king added another sentence. This will be a family heirloom in the future. It will be passed down to the daughter and not the son. I hope that the daughter in the future will also be beautiful. When he finished processing a batch, he saw Nia Yang finish 2 plates of pastries from the corner of his eye. He shook his head helplessly. Don't eat too much at night. It's easy to get indigestion and nausea. How old are you? You don't even notice this. Enchanting was about to nag again. Yang's heart thumped. He mentally prepared himself to be chanted. Enchanting was good, but he was too involved. This made him feel uncomfortable. As they spoke, a burst of hurried footsteps came from outside the tent. Reporting, Enchanting said, "What is it?" The messenger said, "Enemy figures have been discovered in the southeast barracks." In an instant, the words, "night attack," appeared in Enchanting and Enchanting's minds. Send orders everywhere to guard against the enemy. Enchanting asked again, "How many enemies are there?" Of course, the messenger did not know. However, he was sure that the enemy was not large. There were no more than 1,000 of them. A night attack of 1,000 was not enough for the Nya camp, which had more than 200,000 soldiers. What can 1,000 men do? Not to mention that they were discovered by our army. Rather than saying it was a night attack, it's more like seeking death. Nya Yang pretended to analyze in surprise. He then guessed, "Elder brother, maybe the enemy has other troops. Are they trying to create a diversion?" Even though he hated the system to the core, he had to admit that having such a thing was equivalent to having a clairvoyant and clairvoyant. According to the feedback from the system, the enemy had 3,000 men. They were split into 3 groups of 1,000 men each. The troop that the messenger reported might have been a fog bomb to attract their attention. The enemy still had a backup plan. Enchanting said solemnly, "This matter needs to be reported immediately. We cannot delay it." He had just stepped out of the tent when he noticed a fire burning in a certain direction. The enemy had attacked? Before he could finish thinking, there was a series of firecrackers exploding in another direction. As if to cater to these 2 changes, there was another ambush. The enemy shot hundreds of fire arrows into the Nya camp. When Wei Yong heard the news, he was so angry he almost cursed. What are the night patrols doing? How is it that the enemy is less than 50 zhang away from the camp without being discovered? The range of arrows was limited. Even the longer-range crossbows had to be close enough to shoot the fire arrows into the camp. Wei Yong wanted to vomit blood, but he did not discover them at such a close distance. The soldiers guarding the perimeter of the camp also felt wronged. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.